Stargate Book presents The Power of the Will, Over Self, Over Others, Over Fate, Practical Method of Personal Influence by Paul C. JAGOT. Digitally narrated using the voice of Edward Herman. Introduction. To possess a great strength of character, the self-confidence that permits initiative and success, a thoughtful, resolute, tenacious will, the faculty of dominating oneself, of guiding oneself deliberately, a clear, easy, judicious confidence in the presence of anyone, the gift of influencing the thoughts and dispositions of others, the mental vigor and dexterity necessary to overcome 1,000 sorts of difficulties. All this indeed seems inaccessible to most of us. These things, however, can be acquired. The present book will show you how to determine methodically in yourself, to a large extent, all these qualities, however little you may be disposed to it. The effectiveness of the method that we are going to expose to you has been verified by the readers of this manual themselves. 25,000 copies have been sold out in 6 years without the slightest publicity, because everyone who has read The Power of the Will has been satisfied and has recommended it in his own environment. So let the most depressed man take courage and boldly undertake the gradual training that we indicate. His will, however weak, indecisive, and fearful, will not delay in strengthening itself, persisting and imposing itself. The interest presented by this training is capital, and if the reader pays the slightest attention to it, he will feel sufficiently led to attempt a first effort that will give rise to others. To fortify by education the will, the power that holds the conscience, is a matter of exercise. Having taken the first step, from which the impulse will be created by representing the advantages to which it tends, the second step will be better secured, and each new attempt will make the subsequent one more energetic and easier. The subordination of the various psychological activities to the reflexive control of the intelligence constitutes the greatest quality of success, because it renders one fit to act in spite of obstacle or difficulty, in accordance with a decision or principle fixed in advance. It seems to us to be desirable above all other qualities, because it assures the maximum of inner harmony. At a certain stage of psychic development, the will is constantly and intimately associated with the central ego. It allows then to direct one's thoughts, to moderate or to exalt, according to the case, the emotions or the impulses, and to reign supreme over the sensory states. The close influence between the moral and the physical, the notion of which has become widespread in recent years through the therapeutic use of suggestion, manifests itself with the same precision and intensity among those who have sufficiently trained themselves in the voluntary concentration of thought. To them, by maintaining in their consciousness the convenient image, it becomes possible to act on the deeper tissues of their organism. Prior to this possibility, we will see that it is relatively easy to create a mental condition which powerfully affirms vitality and resistance against various pathogenic causes. On the other hand, the will, this is a knowledge ascertained by experimental science, is exercised outside the individual and projects through the ether towards those of whom we think, wave-like movements tending to awaken in them states of mind complementary to our own. Precise, continuous, intense volitions have, it is well understood, a far more effective action at a distance than indecisive, fugitive, and neglected thoughts. Thus, the individual's psychic influence is increased by reducing the multiplicity of moods and by learning to think energetically. Various philosophical schools admit that the human will, by a process which they explain, is affirmed as modifying the secondary causes when it is sufficiently dynamized. Thus way the occultists, the theosophists, the magicians, whose doctrines have among all peoples and in all times of history illustrious representatives. We propose to give in this book a method of developing the will, dealing first with self-control, then with the practice of mental influence at a distance over one or more persons, and finally with the application for those who wish to try it, of the methods of voluntary conditioning of destiny. The first effects brought about by the practices set out below are translated first by an impulse to mental initiative, then by a feeling of security, of power. One is aware of being capable of efforts of will. Little by little, the more rapidly the greater the application, the self-confidence becomes continuous, the parasitic ideas, the dissolving emotional states, the sensory solicitations are dominated. The mastery of oneself increases, and soon one's senses, one's sensibility, one's intellect are directed with the greatest satisfaction. From this moment, having become fit to concentrate one's psychic energy upon a definite image, the power of the will is used, as before has been said, to act in a regularizing way, to medicate or anesthetize the physical organs. Even independently of the direct telepsychic influence on others, it is evident that he who has learned to control himself, to reason with his impressions, to maintain perfect confidence in the presence of anyone, influences, because of this stability, those with whom he deals. A glance that expresses determination, a precise and judiciously conducted speech, a calm and energetic attitude, impress them considerably. Other qualities, intrinsic and always obtained in a remarkable way by the education of the will, are added to the preceding factors of personal influence. Such are the sense of expediency, memory, logical connection of ideas, and rapidity of assimilation. The average man, when he can no longer be disconcerted by circumstances, by unforeseen incidents, by the way others behave towards him, will modify his destiny. Indeed, in the presence of every eventuality, he will preserve the utmost calm and lucidity of spirit in order to act and react. He will discern without disturbance the most advantageous course of action to be taken. Finally, he will carry out what he has planned in a manifestly active manner, with full attention to what he is doing, passing at the appointed moment to the next occupation, maintaining during all the phases of his work the same directive expressing the same volition. The title of this volume, The Power of the Will, is therefore strictly justified from the most positive point of view. Chapter 1. How we must prepare for the training of the will. 1. Determinism and free will. The character of every individual is already formed at the age when he becomes capable of recognizing it. Just as for the physicist, the organic constitution results from heredity, so everything that constitutes our entire moral being, tendencies, faculties, aptitudes, etc., pre-exists the notion of the ego. The reciprocal action of the functions on the intellect and of the intellect on the functions seems to predispose each one to feel, think, act, necessarily in a determined way. Two well-known aphorisms. One does not change one's own nature and cast out what is natural and will return to the gallop, clearly express the opinion, too easily shared, because it dissuades from the effort of the philosophical schools, which affirm that man could not radically transform his own personality. According to this theory, the will is always unleashed at a certain moment under that impulse, which the time and circumstances make the strongest. If it is correct that our impulses, our impressions, our most primitive judgments derive from our psychophysiological conditions, it is no less evident that an education drawn from a source external to ourselves and reflected by our consciousness can create in us the idea, then the decision, to react against this automatism. The one who realizes the opportunity of such a reaction, however, suffers the thrust of his determinism until he has learned to dominate it. This is translated by the notion of subjugation, which he will express by saying, "It was stronger than me," or "I could not help it." The first aim of the present book is to teach how to train oneself to act, in spite of the impulses of automatism, in the sense that the deliberations of judgment indicate as preferable. 2. The way to create in oneself a propensity for effort. Everything that enters through the spirit comes out of the muscles, said the ancients. Modern psychologists also admit the tendency of every idea to be transformed into an act. In accordance with this law, considering with all possible attention the various reasons why it is useful to develop the will, we shall feel ourselves drawn to begin this development practically. Those to whom reasoned meditation is familiar will feel no difficulty in abandoning themselves to the mental contemplation of their reasons for giving themselves to psychic education. On the contrary, if the aptitude for concentration is insufficiently prepared, one will effectively support it by composing a written chart of the modifications one wishes to make in one's personality and the advantages these modifications imply. We believe that we will be useful to more than one reader by giving below some examples of the subject we are dealing with. I want to acquire a continuous calm, an imperturbable confidence, and a justified trust in myself. I want to master anxiety, fear, nervousness, and other paralyzing emotions. I want to keep a perfect lucidity of spirit in all circumstances, to remain master of myself, whatever happens, and to feel perfectly calm in the presence of anyone. I want to make my memory exact and quick, my assimilation alive and correct, my will unfailing. I want to cultivate my aptitudes to the highest degree and acquire superior competence and skill in their field. I want to do what is convenient for me to do at the appointed time, in spite of all the stresses and mishaps likely to keep me away from it. I want to control my physical and emotional impulses and refuse to obey those that are contrary to my life balance, my purpose, my principles. I want to examine with reflection before manifesting them all the ideas that come spontaneously to my mind, that are communicated to me, or that I acquire by reading. I want to manifest that serene tenacity, that gracious energy, that quiet confidence, which dominates individuals and circumstances. The special purpose of each of these examples will inspire the reader with other formulas. For example, a sick person who wishes above all to regain his health might add to the above, I want to train my will until it has the desired strength to modify my condition. After having read the table several times from one end to the other, it is necessary to consider separately each paragraph and imagine concretely its meaning. Thus, the first statement that we have given as a model must be followed by the mental representation of what one would feel if one knew that one possessed perfect calmness, and of the possibilities that such nervous equilibrium would bring. Several authors recommend transcribing with strong and bold handwriting each sentence that the reader proposes to meditate upon, on a rectangle of paper, then keeping one's eyes fixed upon each formula for a few minutes. This procedure is especially suitable for agitated characters, whose attention is less easily diverted by the provision of a material point of support. The lazy, the inert will find, in order to activate their brain, a mechanical aid in walking very quickly while repeating the previous statements. In contrast to physical immobility, which tends to calm brain excitement, movement stimulates thought. Many businessmen unconsciously apply this law as they pace up and down the studio, moved by a concern they are trying to resolve. 3. The help given by the principal aspirations. In order to observe the foregoing, it is necessary to be capable, so it seems to us, of a little reasoned effort. The weakest character would find the necessary energy for this, if it appealed to its own judgment. For it is impossible to conceive of a man who did not experience, in the course of the day, several internal movements generated by his principal aspirations. These movements translate into different stages of consciousness: desire to acquire a capacity or to eliminate a defect, desire for better material well-being, desire for an object, for any satisfaction, for consideration, for personal influence, etc. The habit of associating with aspirations, when they come to mind, the notion of the development of the will, which will enable them to be realized, creates a disposition, at least momentary, to effort. To use this moment to amplify the active momentum by means of the meditation prescribed above is to take the first step and give access to the path of energy. The prospect of becoming a strong personality, physically and morally robust, of attaining a better position, of succeeding in assimilating an art or science, of holding oneself up to the principles which one judges advantageous, and, more generally, of attaining the purpose which one proposes in life. All these constitute a series of ideas' strength, which are channeled in favor of the will by means of the association of the above thoughts. To weariness, indecision, and inertia, let us therefore oppose our superior egotism. Let us repeat that we will not let our lower tendencies hinder the realization of our dearest desires. Let us consider that a trained will is an advantage which has a direct or indirect hold on all others. Let us consider that the development of our volitional power measures the effectiveness of our reaction against what circumstances tend to impose on us as annoying or painful, as well as the effectiveness of our action on every desirable thing. 4. The nervous force. A sufficiently imperious motive will always impel the will, but the will quickly bends when the energy necessary for psychic activity, the nerve force, is lacking. Many diseases of the will result from too little nerve power. Nevertheless, it has been observed that all abstinence needlessly dissipates so much of this precious energy. the reserve of which would be sufficient to improve their condition almost instantaneously. By conserving in the various complexes the nervous force otherwise scattered in useless expansions, the volitional faculty is tonified, which is then sufficiently sustained to manifest itself at the proper time. We therefore prescribe as the first efforts of training a series of inhibitions having, parallel to the fortifying effect of every nervous exercise, that of suppressing important emissions of nervous force. 2 or 3 days' trial will be sufficient to convince the reader of the considerable efficacy of these exercises, for he will experience, consecutive to their application, an almost immediate sensation of power. 5. The general idea of the subordination of self-metism to consciousness. Everyone can observe in himself 2 elements that incite action, 2 sources from which decisions are derived. On the one hand, consciousness, judgment, reason, reflection. On the other hand, automatism. An example will clearly show the interplay of these 2 centers of the personality. A young student sits down at his desk early in the morning to study an abstract question of philosophy that does not abstract him. Outside the sun is shining, and from the half-open window he gets, together with delicious blasts of fresh air, the echo of 1,000 joyful noises. Our boy is sorely tempted to put aside his troublesome book and go out to meet friends. But this movement of automatism, this impulse meets with resistance in the consciousness of the young man. The exam is approaching with an overloaded program. Only assiduity in study will allow him to assimilate it. Then begins the internal struggle on the result of which will depend the conduct of the student. The softening of the methodically conducted automatism, striving to dominate first the insignificant impulses, then the more important impulses, assures little by little his rapid and easy subordination to the representations of reflection. 6. Control of emotional impulses. An enormous expenditure of nervous force accompanies the satisfaction of emotional impulses. Therefore, the best way to begin the culture of the will is to train oneself to control them. Here are the main thrusts. 1. Expansiveness in all forms. In a general way, strive to observe silence. If, for example, you learn of a piece of news and you wish to communicate it to a friend, think that by doing so, you will waste a certain amount of energy. Conserve this energy. Say nothing. Do not manifest your impressions, especially those that are awakened in you by the intentions of those around you. Every exclamation, every word, every gesture withheld increases your nervous reserve. Do not waste your mental strength in intentions of no account, commenting on the events of the day, making appreciations of the people who pass by, or the actions you witness. All this does not mean already unsociability, but simply holding back useless activities for yourself and others. When you must necessarily speak, do not do it mechanically, automatically. Think about your expressions. Replace those words that you would pronounce impulsively with thoughtful words. You must not talk with animation. You would waste yourself in pure loss. Above all, you must not argue. Listen calmly to what is communicated to you without expressing your judgment, unless it is indispensable. Do not allow yourselves to be forced to speak against your will. If any person oppresses you with his talk, take an interest in what he says. Let him waste his nervous strength and continue to condense yours. 2. Desire to obtain the approval of others. A man, whenever an opportunity presents itself for making himself known, endeavors to give others a good opinion of his own personality by manifesting his own opinion, which he always considers superior. Observe who you happen to listen to. You will see how many sterile efforts vanity imposes on the majority of people inclined to desire the approval of others. Observe yourselves well, so that you may carefully repress this tendency. 3. To restrain escalation. By beginning to control a slight movement of impatience, one succeeds in maintaining an imperturbable cold blood, even in the presence of serious provocations. Disappointment, irritation, and exhaustion produce facial expressions, gestures, and loud voices. The exercise of impassibility contributes powerfully to the development of the will. 7. Controls of the sensory impulses. Our 5 senses are ceaselessly affected by a multiplicity of impressions which react upon our mental dispositions. It is an excellent thing to apply ourselves to restraining these impressions. Let us enumerate some characteristic ones for each sense. The appearance of beings, of things, sometimes deeply affects our intimate dispositions. Thus, we let ourselves be influenced by the environment in which we find ourselves. We do not enter, says Silva Rudes, in the same way, the hotel of a village, the drawing room of a socialite, or the cabinet of a celebrated doctor, when the guests are absent from it. The tapestries, the works of art, the crystal in the drawing room, the severe furniture in the doctor's office, involuntarily exert a certain impression on us, which also affects our way of behaving. If, by chance, we witness a more or less tragic accident, we instinctively turn our heads away. The way people dress and walk changes our attitude towards them. The temperature and the gray sky, which give to external objects a certain appearance of sadness and unpleasantness, sometimes disturb our activity. Here are many occasions for exercising self-mastery. The contact of certain things, of certain animals, inspires in our touch a repugnance, or even an insurmountable horror, in appearance. Without seeking this contact, let us endure it with the greatest possible courage when the occasion arises. Discordant, abrupt, unexpected noises produce a contraction of the muscles of the face, provoke a startle, an exclamation. Let us repress these reflexes and train ourselves to listen quietly to the noise of the workshop, to the shrillness of a voice, or to the noise of vehicles. When an unpleasant odor strikes our sense of smell, let us try to remove the source, especially if this odor signals a possibility of intoxication. But if it is harmless, let us not fear its effluvia, saying, "I will not allow this insignificant cause to annoy me." It is known that food preferences and repugnancies do not always correspond to the excellence or to the nobility of the edibles that generate them. In this case, we must appeal to our intelligence and let it prevail in order to regulate our ingestions. 8. Immediate possibility of previous efforts. To be energetic, I have written in a previous work, is one thing. To act as if one were already energetic, at least occasionally, is another thing. Do not say, therefore, one must already have the will to perform a given thing. To do it easily and at all times, yes. But we would not at first advise anyone to make such an effort, as it would be exaggerated. To strive to conform to the conduct which an energetic man would then have, no. If we consider men who are less gifted, we nevertheless see in them the possibility of attempts at resistance, if not of immediately victorious resistance. We must not expect, however strong we may believe ourselves to be, to succeed on the first day in the precise application of our rules. The exact aim of the beginner must be to try often and to take this into account. If, this often happens in the first few days, one does not think, at the moment when the impulse manifests itself, to repress it, one will at least avoid the useful emotion of failure. We will simply note the lack of attention, which we will signal with an internal affirmation similar to this. I want to think about it in time next time. I am absolutely determined to dominate my automatism. Indeed, by repeating this procedure, the consciousness is able to intervene in time. When the same impulse has been assiduously contained during a few days, it almost always returns at a given time with much greater intensity than in habit. This is a difficulty against which we must fight vigorously, for after having mastered it once, we may be sure of conquering later on the primitive impulse with the greatest ease. 9. Of the way to profit wholly from this chapter. Before applying it, read it several times. Its contents will permeate your mind, and the more you understand, analyze, and meditate upon it, the better prepared you will be for its application. When you are sure that you are well permeated by it, when you have observed how the ascent of the indicated training is gentle, gradual, carefully combined, so that anyone can climb it, begin to set yourself the goal of trying the following day to apply one of our prescriptions, putting all your energy and attention into it. Second, repeat the initial effort, followed by a second, different effort. Then try to master all the impulses described. Finally, try during a whole day to act with the whole chapter in mind, and when you have succeeded for one day, start again for a whole week. You will then be very well prepared to pass on to the next chapter. Do not forget to draw from your higher aspirations, from your ambition, from your desire for progress, for superiority, for success, the sustaining comfort of effort. If you are seized by a wave of inertia, Consider coldly this phenomenon. Tell yourself calmly, I feel depressed now, but this cannot last. Besides, in a little while, when I am more trained, I shall not succumb in this way. Finally, pay no attention to discouraging words that may be addressed to you. It is useless to confide to anyone that you are given to psychic culture. This manifestation of expansiveness is the first manifestation that you must suppress. Thus, you will prevent those who are not yet aware of the advisability of such a culture from expressing their opinion. Chapter 2. The Way to Adjust. 1. Organic regularization. The play of the mental faculties, and especially of the will, depends strictly on the organic state. Before having acquired the psychic development necessary to influence the various functions by the concentration of attention on an ideational image, one will regulate one's physical state by applying one's will to impose upon oneself a rational hygiene. The directive of this hygiene consists in scrupulously avoiding all causes of intoxication. The intoxicated person, Dr. Gaston D'Urville has rightly written, feels and sees through his toxins. Psychotherapy proper fails when, in parallel with its application, the patient has not been subjected to a regimen which brings about the elimination of the various poisons which intoxicate the organs. When the cerebral mass draws its nourishment from a vitiated blood, we feel a malaise, with a disposition to inertia, and then very serious disorders are not long in appearing. A slight intoxication is enough to nullify the impulse of the spirit, to create pessimism, sadness, dejection, fear, and fatigue. Individuals of robust constitution do not immediately feel the psychic consequence of the various causes of intoxication, except for a certain heaviness of the head, which comes on especially after meals, but sooner or later arthritis in its various forms distorts their general vitality, diminishes their power for cerebral work, and disturbs their nervous system. Both these and weak, delicate, insecure organisms will experience true renewal by observing the following rules. A rational diet, abundant oxygenation of the blood, and homogeneous circulation are the three primary conditions for physiological equilibrium, which, by freeing the will from all inner encumbrances, places it in the best conditions for development. First of all, it is necessary to regulate one's diet by resolutely discarding from the table hypertoxic edibles. Even when, in spite of the use of these, the elimination functions are perfectly accomplished, they are accomplished only by means of a laborious inner work, which demands a waste of the nervous forces, of which the volitional faculty is thus deprived. This first qualitative measure goes hand in hand with the quantitative restriction of the ingestions. The exact quantity of food which is sufficient for each individual varies according to nature, profession, and climate. But we cannot give, in this respect, an absolute criterion. A meal is too abundant if it causes the least weightiness. Here is, according to Drs. Pascalt and Carton, the nomenclature of two series of foods which usually appear on our tables. The first is recommended to those who care for the integral development of their will, while the second is formally contraindicated. Anything not included in the two lists should be used with moderation. First series. Recommended foods. Leg, ribs, ham, grilled steaks, rabbit, chicken, pigeon, Gruyere, brie cheese, Dutch, Swiss, butter, oysters, sole, lamb, fresh vegetables, potatoes, rice, chestnuts, leeks, artichokes, spinach, watermelon, in. 2. Control of sleep. It is indispensable for the complete disappearance of the fatigue of each day, a placid and sufficient sleep. We then wake up without tiredness. We get up willingly, and the day begins with a feeling of well-being. The clear mind and the lively body present a maximum of power and resistance in the face of cerebral difficulties and material efforts. The man who sleeps well thinks, feels, and acts in the fullness of his faculties. The outward appearance is affected by the benefits of nights well spent. The complexion of one who sleeps normally is fresh. The eyes are clear, the features are calm, the voice has all its timbre, and the articulation has its entire distinctness. Finally, sleeping well preserves well. Every hour given to Morpheus is a true interruption of life, that is, of age. On the contrary, lack of sleep depresses and wears one out quickly. Besides the exaggerated fatigue caused by white nights, these may produce the most serious nervous disorders, which, it may be said, facilitate every other disorder. The lack of rest and the defect of assimilation, which sleepless nights bring, place the organism in a state of minimal resistance to intoxications of every kind, to microbial invasion, to the action of bad weather, to violent emotions, to wounds, in a word, to all the assaults which may be made upon it. In addition to these purely hygienic reasons and those of indirect interest to the will, the exercise of the will, at the moment when we give ourselves over to sleep, is extremely effective. To reduce to passivity the psychological automatism, in relation to which the influx of thoughts continues during rest, requires attention, a self-control which is sometimes considerable, the putting into action of which makes it possible to take a great step in the subordination of inner activities to the reflex will. And this is exactly how to proceed. First, lie down in the middle of the bed or of the part of the bed that can be occupied. All the limbs must be completely relaxed. A comfortable position should be sought so that every part of the body rests with all its weight. We recommend that you lie on your right side or on your back, but, in the latter case, slightly obliquely to the right. Once this is done, and the best position of the body, the one in which we are most comfortable, finally found, impose complete immobility on us. Next, we must see that all our muscles are well relaxed. Let's look at the lower limbs. Are the feet straight? Are they not contracted or twisted? The legs and thighs are placed with their full weight effortlessly on the sheet. Let's look at the position of the chest. Is the chest compressed? Is it contracted? Let's try to give it an easy movement. Are the arms resting perfectly? Is the head positioned so as not to tire the neck muscles at all? After a more or less short time, we generally feel the need to move, so imperiously and instantaneously that we satisfy it before we have even thought of resisting it. Resuming then the primitive position, let us impose immobility again, watching for the return of the impulse, trying not to yield to it. After a quarter of an hour or so of immobility, one feels a sort of pleasant torpor, and realizes that sleep gradually takes possession of us. Thus, the most rebellious insomnia will be vanquished, and the nocturnal agitation, the obsessive dreams will be replaced by a calm, complete deep sleep. 3. Fine-tuning of mental activity upon awakening. The physical and moral inertia of sleep persists more or less long after we have woken up. If we fight it by means of an excitant, for example by means of coffee, it is as if we marked a check on our capital of life. The nervous force, extracted from its plexuses under the action of the drug, gives a stimulus of short duration, which is always followed by a corresponding depression. Therefore, it is not so much necessary to wake up as to recall to ourselves the healthy, strong, well-oriented thoughts that are needed to begin consciously to act according to the principles of psychic culture. After having for some time exercised the self-control of sleep, lucidity of mind almost immediately follows the return of consciousness to activity. Here is the procedure which helps to make us masters of the dissolving impressions of the morning. In the evening, place near you, within reach, any book, the reading of which will interest you. As soon as you wake up, pick it up and follow the impulse of the interest you have in it. Resume reading it where you left off the night before. In this way you will quickly acquire the clarity of your ideas. As soon as you have obtained this first result, leave the book and quickly recapitulate the projects for the day that begins, constantly associating with their mental representation the notion of their interest, or at least the interest you have in some of them. All this takes scarcely 10 minutes and prepares the will wonderfully for action. 4. Voluntary change of thought. To concentrate entirely on one's work, on the examination of a problem, on the occupation to which one gives oneself, contributes not only to ensuring the perfection and rapidity of the intended action, but also to developing the faculties set in motion by the action. To exercise the will in this respect, Seek a moment of freedom and endeavor to give your thoughts a definite goal. The less attractive this goal will be by its nature, the more effective will be the exercise. There is no shortage of subjects that easily attract attention, but by voluntarily directing your thoughts toward them, you will develop psychic automatism. It is better, on the contrary, to stop at some banal auxiliary of our current life, a tool, for example. Consider it under all possible ratios: size, weight, substance. Imagine the successive transformations it has undergone before reaching its present appearance. Think of the importance of this instrument on the market, and of the difficulties which would arise if its manufacture were discontinued. Could this tool be improved? In what way? Independently of the usual uses, which you may review, to what could an ingenious man adapt it? Whenever your thoughts are diverted, lead them back to the chosen goal and begin again your series of observations. You will be surprised at the diversity of notions that will arise in your subconsciousness. At the moment when you are about to become tired during any occupation, suspend your activity, sit down comfortably, remain still for 5 minutes, and endeavor for another 5 minutes to think of a subject very different from the interrupted occupation. The tired centers will rest entirely. You will thus find yourself very soon as disposed to work as in the beginning of the day. All works on the education of the will insist on the preceding exercises. Here are some variations borrowed from various authors. Read every day a few pages of a book dealing with the important sides of life, and concentrate your mind on what you read. Do not allow it to wander and spend itself in pure loss. If it digresses, call it back and impose the same idea upon it again. Annie Besant. Read 5 minutes and meditate for 15 minutes on what you have read. The Theosophists. Keep your torso and head erect while sitting with your chin forward, shoulders as far back as possible. Raise your right arm sideways to shoulder height. Turn your head and fingertips to the right, keeping the arm in its horizontal position for at least 1 minute. Perform the same experiment with the left arm, and when you have achieved agile and precise movements, increase the duration of the exercise from day to day. Atkinson. Take a glass of water, hold it between your fingers, extend your arm straight, well forward, hold it as still as you can, so that the surface of the water does not move. Atkinson. As you walk, examine carefully the people you meet, and notice as exactly as possible the cut and color of their clothes, their footwear, their hats, their attitudes, their gestures, their manners. Proceed through things in a similar manner, and you will soon acquire the faculty of seeing quickly and remembering at length. D'Urville. The time to devote to these different practices will vary with how quickly you want to get the result. In the beginning, you will be able to limit yourself to 2 or 3 exercises per week. 5. The rest. The psychic tension demanded by strivings for the development of the will wears one out more or less quickly. After a period of activity, it is necessary to rest one's faculties for a few hours in order to begin again, fresh and well prepared, the work that has been begun. However hasty we may be to obtain a given result, it would not be judicious to work without respite, because we would incur a depression of a duration proportionate to the fatigue imposed upon us. Knowing how to rest is an art. So is voluntarily abandoning one's most urgent occupations, completely quieting one's brain, releasing one's nerves and muscles in order to give ease to the initial impulse to manifest itself again, and to continue with joy the realization of the plans we have established. Inaction does not by itself dispel weariness. It must be accompanied by perfect mental rest. The practice of isolation described later, Chapter 5, is the best means of avoiding all expenditure of physical and moral energy. Every other distraction will be equally salutary, provided we know how to put an end to it at the proper time, and are not anxious beforehand, that is, before the proper time, to devote ourselves to it. It's best to set the days and hours and the kind of digression. Until the appointed moment, one will avoid thinking about it, observing the principle age quod aegis, that is, the total concentration of the spirit in the occupation of the moment. In accordance with this precept, to detach oneself resolutely from one's task when the hour of amusement rings, and to allow one's attention to be completely absorbed by the physical exercise, spectacle, or game we have chosen, is an excellent thing, as also afterwards, at the end of this useful recreation of the psychic faculties, is to direct one's thought towards the continuation of the work undertaken, resuming one's self-control, and again firmly pursuing the goal. We formally discourage the reader desirous of attaining self-mastery from yielding to accidental occasions of amusement, however seductive they may seem. When suddenly a desire of any kind stirs our attention, we must also be careful not to interrupt the work we have set ourselves at the moment to satisfy it. But it is useful to give it, if we think so, a place during the next period of recreation. 6. Periodic self-examination. Under the influence of multiple solicitations, it can happen that we depart from the directive proposed to us. Unless we have a rare rectitude of judgment, it also happens under certain circumstances that we act hastily and in a manner quite different from what is necessary. Before we have acquired a sufficiently firm will, defections of will frequently betray the best intentions. It is necessary for us to realize exactly the various defects if we wish to eliminate them gradually. That is why it is necessary to foresee a moment of respite at least every week, and to use it to recapitulate the thoughts, the impulses, the emotions of the previous days, trying to find the causes that determined them. It is necessary to judge ourselves without indulgence, to recognize coldly that we have been wrong, that we have lost, that we have allowed ourselves to be dominated by inferior tendencies or by the suggestions of others. It is necessary to examine whether the decisions we have made have been influenced in any way, and, if necessary, we will correct them. We must endeavor to perceive how our judgment has been misled, how we have been led to neglect or violate the rules of mental culture, meditating on the unpleasant consequences of the discards observed, the possible consequences of their renewal, and above all the good effects we expect from the exercise of the will. To conclude, we must vigorously repeat to ourselves that we are determined to react with the greatest firmness, and that we must especially avoid dissolving circumstances. 7. Occasional depressions. The best-tempered characters are sometimes bent and unfortunately broken by an abrupt and painful event. The death of a particularly dear one, the adversity that destroys the fruit of long years of labor, the damage of a painful illness breaks the equilibrium, take away the courage, or destroy the biological sources of energy. The notion of the irreparable is all the more fatally depressing because it prevents all ideas of reaction. What can one object to the atrocious lament that nothing remains for me of what I have lost? What will become of the part and power of the will when the very spring from which it drew new strength every day sinks and leaves the spirit inert? Man at such moments feels a paralyzing astonishment at the thought of the little importance that his will seems to have in the face of the blind cruelty of inevitable catastrophes. He is prostrate before the ruin of what he loved superlatively, and around him superbly continues to move the cold mechanism of external life. As a positive psychologist, it is incumbent upon us to counsel by example. Be persuaded that the most judicious compassion inspires what we will say. Your bewilderment is infinite. Bitterness gushes from your soul. It seems to you that your existence will now run, sorrowful and miserable, in the midst of a world that has become unattractive. Would you at least like to lessen the intensity of your pain? Then resolutely use the following precautions. Distance yourself from all those who know of the misfortune by which you are overwhelmed, and who think themselves obliged to speak to you about it with sympathy. You must not yield to the devil of expansiveness. Do not speak of your condition, and carefully conceal the signs of it. In order to calm the agitation of your thoughts, stay for long hours immobile, isolated in some quiet place outside of your usual environment. You could transform the layout of one of the rooms in your apartment so that you do not gather perceptions that are associated with distressing reminiscences, as well as seek the view of places, sights, things that you do not know. At first you will avoid reasoning or summarizing what has happened. Instead, create as many diversions as possible, take special care of your organism, without losing the opportunity to act with a view to sustaining and increasing your vitality. After a few days, an impression of moral anesthesia will succeed the painful sharpness of the first days. It will then be time to appeal to reason, to reorganize your existence. If you are a materialist, of a positive spirit, the idea of the struggle to create again conditions, analogous to those from which your broken happiness resulted, will certainly smile upon you. If, on the contrary, your observations have led you, as they have led us, to admit the persistence of the personality after death, and a useful finality to the various trials of existence, a vast field of comforting meditations is open before you. 8. Habits. By a well-known phenomenon of automatism, we create for ourselves by habit fictitious, useless or harmful needs, which we are absolutely forced to satisfy. The antagonism of intelligence and automatism could not be better illustrated by the case of the drug addict, who knows that the drug he absorbs causes him suffering, wishes to cease using it, and cannot control the irresistible temptation. It seems that the more harmful the vice, the more tenacious it is, and that to a certain degree of possession, it is incurable. So long as the sufferer retains the notion of the expediency of getting rid of it, recovery still remains possible, for this notion, conveniently developed, soon enough grabs the consciousness to oppose the habit. The will, although often impotent to annul at first sight an automatic movement established months or years ago, can eliminate it quickly enough, whatever it may be. But the first prescription to be observed in such cases consists in obstinately refusing to doubt in the least the outcome of the struggle to be undertaken. We do not immediately master the impressions of discouragement we may feel, but we must consider them as passing, and tell ourselves that they will be followed before it is too late by a fighting mood. Secondly, by appealing to the desire that we feel to free ourselves, it is necessary to use the periodic impetus brought about by the return of this desire to imagine in a concrete, living, precise form the advantages that result from the suppression of the harmful habit. A smoker, for instance, to whom nicotine causes dizziness, heaviness, mnemonic atonias, visual disturbances, etc., will spend an hour or even two in imagining himself as another man who has no desire for tobacco, who works with a brisk spirit, whose body is well disposed, who eats with appetite, digests perfectly, who is in a stable and cheerful mood, who succeeds in his business in carrying through a profitable enterprise, etc., etc. He will imagine what he would feel if he could imagine himself as a man who had no desire for tobacco. He will imagine what he would feel if the use of the pernicious solanaceae inspired him with the deepest disgust and even nausea. Parallel to this method, the subject should not neglect to train his will with any of the exercises already described. The way of dominating the impulses, for example. Then he will try to diminish the dose, to reduce the periodicity of the need, helping himself with an appropriate meditation similar to that already described, or even with derivative provided by another kind of satisfaction. The observance of general hygiene and the control of sleep, which we have dealt with in the second chapter, help to annihilate the greatest number of habits. Finally, in the rare cases in which the patient, too depressed, does not know how to conduct the cure by himself, he can resort to hypnotic suggestion, the effectiveness of which is well known. It has been brought out very remarkably by Dr. Brillen's experiments on drug addicts and perverts. A relative, a friend, animated by the desire to be useful, can effectively try the suggestive method. They will find in one of my previous works all the necessary indications. It is generally easy to acquire a bad habit. Therefore, it is of great interest to carefully avoid everything that can lead to it. To ensure that a fatal tyranny of this kind is not in the process of formation, the examination of one's own person offers the best guarantee. 9. Calmness. Irritation, enervation, agitation have the most pernicious effects. They are vampires of our nervous strength. Under their action, judgment is distorted, because the uneasiness, which we do not delay in feeling in such cases, leads us to hasty decisions. Besides, the will cannot be exercised with tenacity when it has been prey to a certain feverishness for some hours. How to conquer the robust calm that resists multiple causes of disruption? First, avoid believing that such causes can be undone. The life of the most favored is not exempt from contrarieties, cancellations, depressing surprises. The well-balanced man resists them, and removes from them 3/4 of their power over his nerves, by waiting for them at a standstill, considering these adversities as a legion of pygmies, in the midst of which he must move calmly. The acquisition of calmness therefore proceeds from a state of mind characterized by a determination not to be influenced by obstacles and disappointments. When one of the latter occurs, the best is to interdict all outward manifestation of the first impression produced. Inhibition easy for those who have already made an effort to control their impulses according to the preceding instructions. The hypnotic experiment shows a close correlation between the attitude one imposes upon oneself and the mental state that follows. By dominating ourselves, by keeping the mask of impassibility, we tend to train ourselves in psychic stability. After the first shock has been absorbed in a phlegmatic manner, we will find ourselves masters of our energies in order to combat the cause of yielding that once took possession of us, to interpret it exactly, and finally to oppose it with an effective action. The accumulation of nervous force, on the other hand, gradually diminishes the sensitivity to the various factors of mental irritation. But the specific against anxiety, anguish, nervousness in all its forms, is the deep breathing called abdominal breathing, is practiced with advantage as we will now explain. Lying down, the head level with the body, after ridding the torso of any compression of clothing, slowly inhale the air until the rib cage, including the lung apices, is as distended as possible. Then inflate the abdomen, passing the inhaled air into the region of the lungs. You must carry out this inflation of the abdomen gradually and cease when the abdomen is well stretched. Then exhale quickly enough the air stored up and begin the same exercise 2, 3, 10 times. Some authors indicate the inverse passage. That is, they prescribe to begin by strongly dilating the abdomen, then the top of the chest. Others recommend the successive passage, repeated 2 or 3 times during the same inspiration, of air from the pulmonary apices. All these procedures are equivalent because they sufficiently achieve their purpose, which is to diminish the constriction of the solar plexus connected with every emotion. The daily practice of abdominal costal breathing, even if it lasts only 4 or 5 minutes, usefully prevents depressing states. Applied at the very moment in which we feel contrite or anxious, it quickly dissipates the disturbance. It has been successfully used against fear, which may be regarded as the most depressing and the most unpleasant of emotions. We have shown how every idea, especially maintained for a long time in the field of consciousness, tends to be realized. Thus, when one tries to recover or maintain one's serenity, especially by means of the previous breathing process, one will get considerable help by repeating several times an affirmation, such as, "I am calm, tranquil, imperturbable," or, "My will is strong, I can easily withstand this sorrow," or, "I do not want to allow this to disturb me in any way." It does not matter what the formula is, as long as it is clear and positive. To examine, for instance, the cause of the painful nervous impression one feels, to ask oneself what one can oppose to it, to decide what to do, and, if one finds oneself disarmed, to consider it coldly, to tell oneself that one is avoiding it by refusing to stop. Then to put one's thoughts on another subject. This is what one must do. Have you already witnessed, as we wrote in a previous work, the recreative spectacle that a trained businessman gives us, when his secretary, a correspondent, a telephone call, announced to him that a tile has fallen on him, that he has been defeated by a competitor, that an accident has occurred in his workshops or in his warehouses? He does not become agitated. He seems barely moved. He calmly goes to the facts. He indicates the measures to be taken to remedy them, to reduce the harmful consequences to a minimum. After a moment, all his faculties seem to be concentrated on the bad news. As soon as he has set in motion all the means at his disposal against the obstacle, he returns to the subject which interested him before, and seems so calm that one would think him almost indifferent. Just as the use of deep breathing serves to preserve one's calm during a material loss, it is sovereign when it comes to canceling the depressing effect of some emotional preoccupation. 2 or 3 attempts will convince those who are easily disturbed and who frequently feel anxious before every possibility of failure, illness, disappointment, pain, of which their imagination is obsessed. If we add to the regularizing practice in question the habit of reasoning out our impressions, we discover that a good number of annoyances have very little foundation. We realize the uselessness of most of them, and we feel every day less accessible to their action. Whether or not there is any reason to become agitated, let us preserve our calmness so that all the mental energy we have remains at the disposal of our acting faculties. An effort of will, unless it is already very powerful, is not always sufficient to repress emotionality at the very moment it touches us. For this reason, those who seek to establish a continuous calmness in themselves must first of all try to follow as closely as possible the indications given in the previous chapter and in the first paragraphs of this one, in order to strengthen their psychic energy. When an attempt at self-mastery is not entirely successful, it is, nevertheless, a good result, because it facilitates the next attempt and helps to create the habit of resistance. There comes a time when all the scattered and inadequate efforts that have been made result in a very noticeable overall progress. The example of the trickle of water, which succeeds in digging out the stone, applies perfectly to the development of the will. However weak are the reactions to which we give ourselves, however insignificant their immediate effects considered separately, they slowly but surely modify the mentality, and lead sooner or later to the formation of character such as one would wish to possess. Chapter 4. The Way You Organize Your Destiny. 1. Will, character, and destiny. The chain of a certain number of causalities, too complex for us to acquire integral knowledge of them, predestines each one of us more or less favorably. In spite of what we would like to be, to know, to possess, to attain, we find ourselves limited and contrite. Our faculties, aptitudes, tendencies, our capacity for work, the material means that fate has placed at our disposal, the environment in which we find ourselves, are as many elements favorable or as many obstacles to our goal. The destiny we desire is opposed to that which our primitive conditions impose upon us. More or less well armed to react, we see ourselves placed in circumstances in the creation of which our will has not participated at all, and the constraint of which seems to most of us so imperative that we believe we are acting with sound reason by suffering them passively. Let us consider a number of individuals. One, born of a modest family, comes into the world with a capacity which develops without considerable labor, and assures him, in return for the usefulness and enjoyment which it gives to his fellow citizens, of a lucrative remuneration, sometimes even of popularity and glory. Another, though he also possesses in a latent state a remarkable talent, the development of which, however, would require a few years of special culture, has neither time nor means for this development, and survives all his life. A third, compelled to a mediocre existence by his own mediocre organization, nevertheless suffers at the contrast of the atmosphere of monotony in which he lives with the spectacle of brilliant careers. A fourth of superior quality suffers the perpetual stumbling block of a sickly physical state. More generally, at the moment when we begin to think for ourselves, to conceive the quality of the impulses of our ego, with the constraint of the non-ego and the impulse prior to the awakening of our personality, a desire for a threefold modification manifests itself in the depths of our innermost being: a desire for better health, for a suitable environment, for greater knowledge. The will of the individual, enclosed in the web of his radical destiny, will break this web if it is exercised by following a norm whose directives this work aims to indicate. First of all, we should consider effort as the most indispensable of the weapons we are given to fight and persuade ourselves that the first step towards the transformation of our destiny must be taken by working on our own modification. The events of life, says Emerson, are born on the same branch of character. We have attempted in what precedes to show the possibility of directing oneself, of developing one's useful activities, of softening one's impulsiveness, the result of atavism, of education, and of the characters of primitive circumstances. We assume that the reader is sufficiently trained on this path. He could not apply himself to what follows without having already, to a certain extent, endeavored to make himself master of his own personality. 2. Health. The efficacy of personal action upon destiny is measured by the intensity and skill of the effort of which one is capable, an effort which is insufficient if one's physical health leaves something to be desired. Therefore, the man who wishes to succeed will first of all apply himself to observing the conditions necessary for organic equilibrium. In Chapter 2, we touched upon this important subject and affirm our experimental conviction upon the result of the prescriptions which you have read. Those, therefore, whose general condition is afflicted only by maladies, by a certain weakness, by periodical depressions, must consider again the passage quoted, paying the most scrupulous attention to it. After a few weeks, they will notice an appreciable regularization of their functions. If they continue to conform to these rules, their strength will increase. Age will not diminish this robustness, and a normal senility will reach them. Their faculties will not undergo a marked diminution. The doctors Gelly, Michaud, Sartori, Disserman, Metchnikoff, and other scientific personalities have shown by notorious examples that extreme old age leaves intact and even increases the intelligence of those who avoid intoxication. Unfortunately, the child at birth carries with it one or more physiological defects, which impede its entire life. Since the organism then reacts spontaneously against all equilibrium, if this self-healing power is fostered by a well-understood hygiene, most sick people can be considered curable. Lamentable diversions, unworthy of our century, so proud of its own enlightenment, induce the majority of those who suffer to act in such a way as to perpetuate their state of suffering, when they imagine that they can improve it. We address ourselves here to those readers who are ill-treated by atavism, and who are desirous of eliminating the internal element that hinders their will. Chemical medicines are directed against the effects of injuries or disorders, sometimes removing them for some time, but not at all remedying their causes. Besides, if they give a momentary relief, yet their ingestion generates new alterations. It is necessary to turn to naturalistic methods, the aim of which is to raise the vital tone, and thus to secure the energy necessary for the self-reactive power of which we have spoken above. Rational nourishment, the utilization of the properties of plants, air cures, mechanotherapy, magnetism, are the only truly renewing means of the debilitated, the stunted, the fatigued, and the most rapid modifiers of all functional disturbances. In the following chapter, we shall show how the will acts directly upon the tissues, upon each organ, upon the functions proper to each organ. No sick person should consider himself as incurable. We are sure to astonish many of them by saying that for them the best physician is themselves. The symptoms they feel give them sufficient indication to understand their own case well by studying it in a treatise on pathology. By submitting oneself to a convenient diet, each one can powerfully promote his own return to health. Here, indirectly, the will seems to be the first factor in the recovery, because it is necessary to be consistent in ideas and firm to avoid absorbing contraindicated substances. The pharmaceutical specialties, of which the fourth page of the daily newspapers is full, owe their success largely to the sluggishness of the sick, who count on a medicine that frees them from the disease, dispensing them from gastronomic discipline. We are convinced that the curative powers attributed to the contents of these multicolored bottles, which are paid for by the weight of gold, are expressed above all through faith, that is to say, through autosuggestion. To each disease corresponds not only a special regime, but a particular hygiene where various means intervenes adapted to favor the functioning of the organ or organs concerned. To enrich the blood by giving it an element of hypotoxic formation, to stimulate or moderate certain functions by means of aero, hydro, mechano, magnetotherapeutic reactions, to keep firm and constant the will and the hope of recovery. These are, in our opinion, the true remedies. They will not disappoint any of those who will try them loyally. 3. Plan of action modifying destiny. The life of the men who have arrived by their own means at the goal they were aiming at shows that the dominant line of their character is the continuity of the same directing state of mind to which they have, at the beginning of their life, subordinated all their other aspirations. What has been accomplished by these men seems fabulous. Yet their activity was more uniform, methodical, judicious, than intensive. Their daily effort, as they themselves have described it to their historiographers, does not seem boundless, feverish, overwhelming as some imagine, but regulated, calm, skillfully distributed. It would be inaccurate to pretend that every individual resolved to cultivate the regularity of work will one day become equal to the predestined types to whom we allude, to merchants like Ruel or Busico, to industrialists of great class like Carnegie or Rockefeller, to artists, men of letters, physicians, illustrious soldiers, whose names have traveled the world. But nevertheless, it is evident that a man, however modest his condition and ill-favored by his inheritance and circumstances, will obtain the maximum of what his qualities permit if he takes into account a plan conceived following a fixed orientation to modify his original destiny, leading it little by little to coincide with his ideal. The Romantics bitterly deplore the contrast of the genial poet starving in rags in some icy attic and the dull, quiet, satiated shopkeeper. The former cannot produce as regularly as the latter. The difference in the inequality of their material life has this one cause. The artist should be freed from pecuniary concerns. Between these two extremes we may consider the continually renewed example of individuals who vegetate, though endowed with real talents, because they do not exploit them by continuous rectitude, and others, ordinary people, who in time create for themselves an enviable situation by regular activity. Certainly, there is no lack of very splendid personalities endowed with innate qualities to succeed, enjoying themselves without apparent effort, and unhappy ones, so sadly classified that their goodwill, their courage, and their toil are only useful to their lord employers. All have an interest in following our methods. In the extreme poverty of means, they allow us to improve ourselves, to free ourselves, to acquire little by little qualities sufficient to determine a certain well-being. In the opulence of the gifts of nature, they help to assure the future of success. From our work, The Modern Scientific Method of Magnetism, we think it well to extract a passage relating to the preceding one. Well-endowed individuals, whose inborn talent has made life easy, and for whom most of the satisfactions for which mankind strives, seldom think of making psychic culture. Determinism being favorable to them, they have no desire to go upstream. Their personality possesses 2 or 3 good means, the activity of which enables them to sustain easily a very profitable or delightful part, repaid with all sorts of advantages. They are well served by their atavism, but they are also strictly tributary to it. Being one-sided, their physical vigor remains weak or null for everything that does not concern the kind of work to which they are predisposed. An artist, a man of letters, an engineer, a doctor, a craftsman endowed with exceptional faculties, are incited by the very facility of their success to a moral passivity from which may result the adversity and annihilation of their values. For the one, it will be a passion which will lead him to a morbid condition. For another, an emotional blow, the memory of which will forever disturb his own internal harmony. For a third, a financial reversal, which cannot be surpassed without the application of the faculties which he never had the idea of developing, etc. Without going to the worst, we commonly see a man known as intrepid enslaved by a whore, a valuable industrialist incapable of authority in his private life, a beneficiary of a fat sinecure to liquidate it, urged on by the exaggerated needs he has created for himself, an artist who out of desperation for love gives himself up to drug addiction and drowns physically and morally, a person whose resources are diminishing, who lets himself be tortured day and night by the idea of less luxury and less satisfaction of self-love. To make an effort seems to be a common law, and those from whom destiny does not seem to demand any remarkable effort would derive the greatest advantage from the total development of their faculties and from gaining mastery over themselves. Let us consider how much more powerfully the personality of other individuals asserts itself, who, though favored like the preceding ones by special talents, have met in the beginning of their existence with serious obstacles to their development, to the development of their own attributes. They have had to struggle. They have had to impose upon themselves not only the efforts of work, without which no one attains anything honorable, but also deprivations which have revealed to them their power of controlling their own appetites and even their own needs. They have had to give up most of the amusements sought by their young peers. They have had to resist unceasingly those impulses which led them to dissipate their energies and their material means. They have ignored flattery, vanity, and softness. Mediocrity, need, obscurity, instead of ruining their psychic vigor, have prevented them from that multiplicity of states of mind where man, unable to avoid the traps complacently set by collective vanity, sterilely disperses his forces. The modicum of income at their disposal, distancing them from the crowd, has accustomed them to draw inspiration, courage, and incitements from themselves. Now they are strong because they know that they can be sufficient for themselves. The possibility of adversity following their successes does not torment them. They do not fear it, because they have already fought against it. And if some affliction that does not depend on their own will comes to threaten them, to strike them, they will oppose it with the lucidity, the presence of mind, the rectitude of judgment necessary to avoid it if possible, to diminish its effects, or to accept it coldly without exaggerating its importance. Those who give themselves to psychic culture are generally drawn to it by the introspective realization of the insufficiency of their own means. Some of them deal with this question in a very precise way and draw all possible benefit from it. But most, when faced with the contrast of their own weakness and the kind of Superman that is depicted in the courses that follow, allow themselves to be disconcerted and too easily convinced by this tendency to inertia hidden in the depths of each of us, of their inability to make the effort required by the culture of the will. They declare that they do not have enough tenacity, that those around them exert on them a dissolving action on the little energy they possess, that their nervousness interdicts them from any coherence of ideas, that the effort to maintain with deliberate purpose this or another idea makes them tired and gives them a headache, that their daily need, beyond the concerns of private life, exhausts all their psychophysical capacity. This is often true, but, as we have shown in the preceding chapters, absolutely of an initial effort no one is incapable, and if we have made this initial effort to master ourselves, we can consider ourselves armed to act upon destiny. The idea, the intention, the desire to transform one's condition, if one meditates on it calmly, at length, with attention, arouses from the depths of the intelligence a quantity of connected cognitions. To give ourselves to fruitful meditation in this sense, it is better to isolate ourselves, to place ourselves in a comfortable position, and to be ready to notice everything that comes to mind. The mental comparison of the state of one's personality with that which one desires, of the elements of one's present situation with the advantages one would like to obtain, inspires an uninterrupted series of judicious reflections. Thus, we become aware of the degree of aptitude or knowledge indispensable for occupying a given position or performing a given task. From the sum total of the thoughts that have arisen from the preceding meditation, one can very easily formulate a series of thoughts. From the sum of the thoughts that have arisen from the previous meditation, it is very easy to work out an overall plan, which, with new sessions of reflection, will allow one to carry out accurately. However distant the goal we propose may seem, its accessibility becomes tangible if we observe clearly the different stages of the path to reach it. Just as in climbing a mountain we set ourselves points, prescribing ourselves. To begin with, I will go there, from there I will reach a new, higher point, etc. The realization of a plan, the execution of a plan, the achievement of a goal, the achievement of a goal. The realization of a plan, the performance of work of long duration, and the realization of great designs in life require a series of efforts, spread over a number of stages. Every regular career proceeds in this way. To become a sculptor, for example, after the general studies, those of anatomy, of the different parts of the drawing, the handling of tools, the reproduction of all kinds of subjects, mark many successive applications to which the future artist must force himself for a long time. When, at the moment when personal ambition awakens, man undergoes the impetus of a current imposed by previous necessities, the difficulty, let us not conceal it, is enormous, never insurmountable. In order to obtain the best results from our efforts, it is advisable to direct our choice and to keep it on that kind of occupation to which we seem to be predisposed in order to assimilate it in the most complete, perfect, and easy way. The individual forced by necessity to give himself to a job that does not attract him at all, and during which he returns unconsciously in thought to the position that would have suited him, has an interest in quietly noticing the possibilities of a change and the means of carrying it out step by step. Psychic culture sufficiently arms most people to attempt, with every probability of success, a rectification of existence. Instead of wearing oneself out with sterile regrets, one will decide to carry out the present task in the most perfect way possible, assigning to it the part of exercise for self-mastery. One will make an effort not to think of anything else but what one is doing. And during the hours of work, one will use one's intellectual faculties to examine how to create the desired situation and acquire the necessary knowledge for this, etc. One will estimate the time needed for this, will draw up an overall plan divided into several stages, each having its own distinct purpose, and will set to work calmly and firmly. The unavoidable obstacles must be carefully considered, estimated in their proper value, studied one by one at the desired time, attacked, eliminated, and subsequently demolished. If you consider as an impressive block the set of difficulties that oppose the realization of your will, you are suggesting fear. Before thinking about the obstacles, it is necessary to remember that you want to succeed, and you must avoid conceiving of failure. Instead of wasting our strength, let us think of overcoming the first obstacle we encounter. Let us then think of the second, and then concentrate all our energy on the present effort. If luck depended only on the one obstacle that stops you, prevent it from depriving you of what you desire, you would see it with different eyes. Go on. Each victory will give you a little more security. There will come a time when not only will difficulties no longer disturb you, but you will attack them automatically. And indeed they will be for you an element of satisfaction, whose deprivation you will regret. Sit. 4. Some indispensable qualities. The first of all voluntary qualities is energy. The second is the restraint of energy, its calm and judicious distribution, without useless waste, without restriction in the established effort, always measured, calm, even. Energy itself is increased. First, with observing the rules previously given for accumulating nervous force. Second, with training. Third, with the ascertainment of the happy results obtained. The habit of repressing expansiveness, of seriously examining the expediency of every decision we are compelled to make, enables us to restrain impulsiveness continually in active life and in business. When we have traced the main lines of the general plan of modification of destiny, when we have sufficiently specified the particular goal of each of the stages which it involves, it is convenient, without losing sight of the whole or of the final goal, to commit ourselves solely to the realization of all that was planned for the first stage. When we wake up, after a few minutes spent in regaining consciousness of the orientation we have assigned to our life, we spontaneously think of taking stock, that is, meditating for a brief moment on the problems in progress, trying to realize where we have arrived. Thus, the obligations of the day that begins will occupy our thoughts. We recommend the representation, as in a pause of mental cinematography, of what must happen in the following 12 hours. Let us see ourselves acting according to the best directives, dominating the occasions of error, succeeding in breaking down every difficulty, obtaining the passivity of some and the concurrence of others, etc. A daily period of work, if you consider it as a stone that, added to other similar ones, makes the construction of the plan you are aiming at proceed, seems attractive and fruitful. All this initial meditation takes barely a quarter of an hour. Its importance demands that we do not sacrifice it to the carelessness of a late awakening, or to the fantasy of the imagination, which almost always wanders when it leaves the world of dreams. To him who has decided to develop his personal power, and to put into action without respite the blind but docile forces of fate, the 1,000 movements of the day seem like so many exercises to sharpen his faculties. Dressing himself, he will cultivate the habit of precise, rapid, elastic gestures. He will try to put on his clothes in the shortest possible time, without neglecting any detail. He will undertake his work with attention, firmness, method. He will not neglect to make use of antagonistic incitements as opportunities to control his impulses. In his dealings with those around him, clients or colleagues, he will apply his fixed central gaze, the positive word, the principles of persuasion, taking care at the same time to choose and combine correctly, without slowness and idleness, the words he will have to use. When a difficulty arises, he will lively concentrate his attention without departing from serenity. He will decide how to proceed to solve the obstacle and attack it at once. In moments of haste, when a number of points of view or occupations will simultaneously solicit his will, he will mentally arrange them in the order that seems best to him for action, and always calmly, which will not prevent him from accomplishing many things in a short time. He will undertake each thing and deal with the next as soon as he has successfully completed the first. In his book, The man who succeeds. Silva Rudez sets out in a few vivid lines the qualities suitable for work. Look at the work you have to do from every side, he writes. Don't try to hide the difficulties from yourself, and see if you can overcome them. Whenever you set to work, think exclusively of what you are doing. Have no other idea in your head. Let this be your only concern. The brain commands the muscles, and if you have other ideas in mind, it will let the nervous force escape in several directions at a time, instead of focusing it on the one that should occupy it. You will have distractions. Each part of your work must be of equal interest to you, and you must take equal care with each one. We don't all have the same capacity for work. Everyone should apply himself to know himself well, to evaluate how much daily work he can do without affecting his health, and try to limit it accordingly. Hard workers do not always succeed. To reach exhaustion is to go to ruin. No task is inferior to others. The humblest work demands its share of attention, which must never be denied. If one analyzes well, if one understands well a first work, the following work will be even better executed with the spirit and the hand already trained by the previous observation and execution. Thus, the morning work will benefit from the experience gained in the evening work. We insist that, in order to take account of all these excellent principles, a reserve of energy is indispensable. At the precise moment when boredom, fatigue, incidental ideas, external derivations tend to hinder us in the application of the established line of conduct, the voluntary reminiscence of our directives will instantly bring our mental attitude back into those conditions in which its reflex action on our plexuses finds the desired accumulation of force. One of the main causes of dispersion, of waste of the powers of being, is to rely on other factors instead of those we hide within ourselves. Not only does everyone have to nurture confidence in themselves, but we must get used to relying on ourselves. We live, says Silva Rudez, under the regime of the bronze law. To produce a lot, at low cost, obliges the mine, the workshop, the land to pay poorly for an excessive effort, to go beyond the limit imposed by nature on the human machine, to violate in the name of necessity the rules indispensable to its preservation and its improvement. As long as man is man's enemy, and as long as this division favors the appetite of some to the detriment of all the others, as long as the right to happiness and well-being of those who are worthy of it is not written in indelible letters at the head of the law, as long as the classes do not unite in unanimous and fraternal agreement, as long as force and not reason is queen of the world, the present state of things will last. Against this desolating situation, continues the same author, there is only one effective remedy. This remedy is the individual education exercised by oneself on one's own character, on one's own acts. One could not speak better. There is nothing to foreshadow a time, even a very distant one, when the community will one day be organized with justice in its relations with the individual. Let us, therefore, rely exclusively on ourselves. Let us perfect our aptitudes, our faculties, increase our energy, exercise our will, and while we take account of external discord, let us not waste time in recrimination. Let us not lose ourselves in whining against social injustice, the greed of the exploiters, the inexperience of the rulers, the character of those we have to complain about. Let us not complain about fate, about contrary combinations, about the great effort we have to make. Let us organize ourselves within the framework of the initial destiny and maneuver calmly, methodically, to transform it. Instead of interpreting the actions or circumstances that are contrary to us by saying, "If this had not happened, or if such a one had fulfilled his duty to me, it would be better," realizing that recriminations and annoyances uselessly waste our mental strength, to tell us, "How can I excuse what I regret? How can I avoid its return? How to escape this unpleasant event?" Diplomacy must be opposed to men. Regular, uniform, and steadily directed events give a more useful result than very intense labor alternated with periods of inaction. If the success at which we aim requires during some time an excessive waste of forces, only by training ourselves progressively to increase our own power of performance will we be able to sustain in the safest way a little later, during weeks, months, years, if it is necessary, the intense activity which we propose to use. Knowing how to rest, how to relax, how to detach ourselves from our worries, deserves serious attention on our part. Sleep, which we have already discussed, is not sufficient to restore all our faculties. Next, we will describe the best method of regaining strength: isolation. In the course of ordinary life, a great number of distractions are offered to us, the choice of which is of little importance, provided that they fulfill the twofold condition of changing our ideas almost completely during their duration, and of leaving no source of obsession or dissipation in the spirit. Here is what we say on this subject in a volume already quoted. The busiest men, those who represent important parts of humanity, assign a daily place in their lives to physical and moral recreation. The best of all is undoubtedly the practice of a moderate sport that requires the concurrence of faculties completely different from those brought into play during work. Walking is the most elementary sport. From all points of view, it is excellent. Skating, rowing, swimming are equally healthy for the body and the spirit. Entertainment has the disadvantage of predisposing one to a multiplicity of moods, which diminish attention. They lose their disadvantages for those who are already sufficiently in control of themselves, and who, while giving themselves completely to the theatrical emotions during the performances, regain, on leaving, complete control over themselves and do not let themselves be obsessed, therefore, by prolonged reminiscences. If it is prudent to rely only on us for the realization of our plans, this rule applies first to their conception and appreciation of beings and things. Without neglecting to inform ourselves wherever we can, it is necessary that we should accustom ourselves to see for ourselves and form our judgments with perfect independence. The advice, opinions, and exhortations of experienced and wise persons may usefully contribute to enlighten us. The views of the humblest must also form the object of impartial examination. But in the last analysis, your own personality is always the best judge as far as you are concerned. To follow an opinion because it is held by an illustrious man or an important community, to fear to stray from the beaten path, from empirical methods, constitutes so many stumbling blocks to the development of individuality. If the great mass of men suffers slavery, anti-fascism, and social oppression, it is because they have not learned to think for themselves. He who wants to dominate destiny will have to avoid this stumbling block. First of all, he will strip himself of all vanity. The acquiescence of his own judgment, inspired by his own directives, by his own purpose, will remain the only important thing for him. Too many real difficulties barricade the way for us to disregard them. But let us implacably refuse to give weight to what will be said, to prejudices, to inveterate customs, to the spirit of parochialism, of sect, of caste, to family and even national idiosyncrasies. Experience makes the comparison between truth and error. The undecided avoids, perhaps, a certain number of blows and sorrows, but they suffer worse ones. The best is to deliberate with all independence, to test the result of one's decisions after the fruitful lesson of facts. 5. Fortune and disdain. Considered in the study of the marvelous under all forms, the problem of fortune has fascinated us. How many persons have we observed who have seemed to us to be favored by invisible agents who dispensed all joy for them, warded off the consequences of their faults, wrecked the affairs of their adversaries, lavished success, the favors of the people in general, and perhaps adoration? Others we have seen, and how much more numerous, afflicted by manifold disillusionments, by misfortunes that were increasing, suffering disease, misery, embittered atrociously in their noblest and highest sentiments. Puzzling problem. Truly it seems that a radiant star sometimes rises from birth, protector of destiny, while a black fatality stands tenaciously in the shadow of the unhappy creatures and pushes them implacably to the extreme limit of the painful path of despair. From the mass of moving recollections, preciously concealed in our memory, there develops a particularly bitter observation of the apparent inconsistency of the intangible dispensers of good and bad fortune. Why have we witnessed at the same time the insolent triumph of massive spirits attached to a fat appetite, and the wise torture of delightful beings, in whom every sensibility and every nobility seem to be united with the most exquisite finesse? Is there but the appearance of other causalities, the fatal chaining of facts which affect our senses? When an unhappy man spends his life groaning under the grip of an evil transmitted to him by his ancestors, must we limit our reflections to the physiological law of heredity? When a catastrophe upsets and ruins the edifice built with years of labor, when it spreads over the widow in her prime a sheet of inconsolable distress, disperses the children, and confines them to the most repugnant promiscuity, Will the initial incident limit our impulse towards the knowledge of the most disconcerting whys? When a moment of carelessness leads to the irreparable, why shall we not seek the cause which gives us the explanation of such a disproportion? In a following volume we shall return to this exciting subject. Presently we shall consider fortune only in relation to the will. For, if no one can deceive himself into grasping this madness, each one conceals within himself means which enable him to escape from the hypothetical opposing entity, and determine for himself the favors of which fortune refuses him the gift. We have not been able to discover the slightest relation between fortune and personal merit, as it is commonly understood. But experience has shown us that the development of psychic individuality, in the way we indicate in this book, gradually frees the one who applies himself to it from the grip of fate, which seems inherent with his personality. As the will becomes stronger, it weighs more and more on the scales of the multiple causes from which events arise. The human being then becomes a conscious factor in his own destiny. He is no longer tossed about like a fragile boat on the ocean of life. His judgment becomes a precise rudder, which he holds with all the energy of his trained will. Those who fanatically advocate the power of the will claim that man depends exclusively upon himself. Fatalists, on the other hand, proclaim that each one is subject to an inevitable destiny. In our opinion, the latter exists, but as soon as we become aware of it and rise up against its unfavorable elements, we modify it no matter how critically we strive. Indeed, no one can deny that the training of the will enables to improve one's physical health, to increase the endurance of one's organism, to act upon one's functions by autosuggestion, to regularize in oneself the impressionability, the emotionality, the sentimentality, the impulsiveness, the imagination, the memory, and the other subconscious manifestations, and allows to put them under the directive of the reflex idea of judgment. To annul, if necessary, the influence on one's own person of others considered individually, of the environment, of the community, to preserve the complete freedom of one's own thought and actions, to exert an influence on oneself and on those with whom one may have to deal, in such a way as to predispose them in our favor, so as to obtain the greatest possible consideration and favor for the faculty, aptitudes, and skills we possess, to know how to inspire in their own sphere sentiments and ideas likely to usefully direct those in whom we are interested, to bring together the maximum elements of success and resilience against adversity, to make continuous progress, to increase the capacity and vigor of one's faculties, the breadth of one's intelligence and means of action. On the other hand, for most of us the probabilities of success and the fatalities manifest themselves in the course of our existence in an almost equivalent way, and as soon as personal effort intervenes tenaciously and with some continuity, the scales do not delay in leaning on the good side. 6. Trials, adversity, misfortune. Here are two equally fatal attitudes in the face of adversity: passive resignation and blind revolt. Both paralyze the action of the will. The most favored existence involves hours of torment, and there are very few people to whom life does not reserve many oppressive periods. In the presence of any distressing eventuality, it is necessary first of all to preserve one's calm, to concentrate and to examine the situation without adding or detracting from the facts. Psychic development always avoids a great number of calamities, and we are convinced that to a certain degree it radically prevents them. When one of these calamities occurs, lucidity of spirit, rectitude of judgment, and the spirit of struggle in spite of everything reduce the bad consequences to a minimum and even systematically eliminate the causes. Just as a general is attentive to the vicissitudes of battle, ready to respond according to his strategic knowledge to the momentary advantages of the enemy, so each one of us in the hour of danger must mobilize his faculties, maneuver them skillfully, give himself body and soul to the effort, never accepting a definitive defeat, accepting failures with a smile, never forgetting that he can react, and that he counts as an important element in the interplay of favorable and opposing forces. There are certain misfortunes that imply the irreparable. Only a preventive attitude can avert them. Carelessness, neglect, ignorance, and moral weakness determine most of them. The habit of daily meditation, recommended in the preceding chapter, may be regarded as a measure of vigilance, because, during its performance, a number of associations of ideas, reflections, and reminiscences illuminate the mind, giving it a kind of foreknowledge of possible dangers, and giving useful inspirations, as to the way of avoiding them. By seriously putting our intelligence, our will, and our activity to work, we can be sure of rapidly overcoming the various difficulties that we encounter. And this, the more quickly we will be able to keep exclusively our mental tension towards a single point at the vault. He who passively suffers the blows of fate, who does not maintain the hope and firm intention of better days, who surrenders himself in a word to fate, cannot expect it to change. One should not confuse calmness with indifference or weariness. Calmness sometimes creeps into the souls of the most intrepid for a few hours or days, but they quickly overcome it. Beneath the outward impassiveness and in connection with active serenity, a continuous volition from the greatest depths of consciousness must animate the individual who struggles against antagonism or affliction. But feverish haste is not activity. It is of no use. To show one's fists, to contract one's muscles, to become agitated, to disperse one's energy in several directions at once, to yield to the emotional impulses one feels. The more serious the case, the more urgent is the need to preserve calmness and to appeal to reason. Without lingering in fear of the various unpleasant eventualities that may befall us, let us consider how satisfied we shall be on the occasion to find ourselves in possession of a solid will, armored by an imperturbable impassibility. And let us add this motive to all those from which we shall draw the necessary impetus each day to persevere on the path of energy. 7. Conceive as an idealist, execute as a realist. Aim high, recommends Andrew Carnegie to young clerks desirous of success, and he adds, I would not pay a penny for a young man who does not already see himself as a partner of the head of an important firm. Do not be content for a moment in your thoughts to be the principal clerk, director, or general manager of no matter what firm, however considerable. Each one must say to himself, my place is at the top. Be a king in your dreams. Vow to reach that place with an unblemished reputation, and make no other vow that will distract your attention. Empire of business. Beginning with one's master plan of life, each one must aim for the summit. This is indispensable in order to reach the highest possible point. But this does not imply presumption and wandering of the imagination in the reverie where contemplatives so love to distract themselves from reality. Aim high, but at the same time be aware of all the capacities which you will have to accumulate later in order to reach it. Determine to acquire the qualities and to put yourself in the necessary conditions for this. Each man could accomplish much more if he did not limit his ideal to the probable future that the present state prepares for him. Restless, spurred on by a noble ambition, effort, labor, and resistance to dissolving temptations, are accomplished with the aid of a powerful help. To know how to unite the mental aim of the greatest successes with a precise positivism in the domain of facts constitutes one of the surest qualities for the successful regulation of one's destiny. It is necessary, says a wise proverb, to walk with our eyes on the sky and our feet on the ground, not to lose sight of the plane of reality during our actions, but to orient ourselves towards the summits during the meditative moments that prepare us so well for action. Ambition does not necessarily mean an inordinate desire for wealth and honor. The medical student, enamored of his profession, will imagine himself to be the equal of that great clinician whose teaching he now follows. The artisan will keep his thoughts on the desire to produce with unparalleled perfection and rapidity. The young novice in a house of commerce will imagine himself to be similar to that expert in the branch he follows, and will live with a desire to know in the minutest detail all things that relate to it. In all fields, the same principle is applied. A person who is sickly, or who has to deplore some insufficiency, will have to overcome first the obstacle of such a state. He will avoid complaining and will apply himself to the exact execution of the indications given in chapters 1, 2, and 3. Soon he will have acquired the equilibrium which he lacked. One of the greatest sources of satisfaction offered to man is the possession of an above-average competence, either in his profession, if he exercises one, or, if he is favored by fortune, in a branch of his choice. It is only by prolonged application over a period of years that the knowledge and mastery indispensable to the possession of any art can be obtained. The humblest profession, when one excels in it, creates a sort of royalty in it, in addition to the material profit derived from it. All the individuals we have known, whatever their social rank, and whose professional abilities were out of class, were radiant with optimism and serenity. What is more desirable than this security, this valor, this thorough science which allows the maximum of social utility, which assures esteem, which attracts to itself the aristocracy of the environment in which one lives, and moreover generally procures a wide and easy life. If inventors of genius die in misery, it is due to the lack of one of the elements necessary for success, generally the sense of reality in business. A factory manager in any industry often earns 10 times as much as a first-rate scientist. The value of the one has been able to adapt itself to the utilitarian plane, while the other, absorbed by his own ideals, has refused to make such an adaptation. But he nevertheless has the moral satisfaction inseparable from a profound competence. Aiming high, it is important not to omit anything, and the inventor of whom we speak should not only aspire to the discovery of which he dreams, but to the qualities of striving and personal influence with which he will spread the fruit of his labors. From all points of view, psychic culture and the development of the personality appear to be the indispensable means and complement of all other education. Hundreds of graduates and free teachers vegetate. Their knowledge remains useless. The knowledge they have patiently acquired will die with them, without having brought them the slightest reward, because they lack that strength of character which opens doors, overcomes indifference, decides others to compete, and obtains the equivalent of what is given. We bow with sympathy and also with respect before these victims of an inadequate will, citing them as an example to show that intrinsic value owes to itself the possibility of acquiring the qualities that make merit worthwhile, and give it with bitter struggle the place it deserves. 8. Egotism and altruism. While egoism consists in mercilessly sacrificing others whenever it is judged necessary to obtain any satisfaction, egotism is a state of mind characterized by the determination to extend one's own personality. Egoism always proceeds from a certain weakness. Egotism, on the contrary, constitutes a strength. If you are determined not to let others impose anything on you against your health, your faculties, your success, your personal influence, you are egotistical. You will manifest selfishness instead by showing yourself eager to benefit alone from the advantages which the principles of egotism assure you. No one has succeeded by himself if he has not, during a certain time, concentrated his attention on his own person and on his own purpose. Nothing could divert him, says Rhodes. No criticism could paralyze his action. Removing obstacles with skill or money, with a gaze insensitive to the attractions of the path, deaf to all sentimentality, he walked without stopping, with a sure and voluntary step, towards the victory he desired, towards the superiority he aspired to. The man who succeeds. Rhodes does not mean that he who has been quoted as an example has destroyed all sensibility in himself, but that instead of wasting it on 1,000 occasions, he has preserved it in order to lavish it at the right moment. Egotism does not suppress altruism. It regulates it. The strong-willed man will willingly impose an extra effort in order to be grateful to a friend or to help someone in misfortune. But he will refuse a gesture which will paralyze his action or upset his plans. Each one must benefit according to his wealth. Morally, he whose whole energy is not too much to sustain his courage and maintain the calmness of his nerves in the midst of difficulties must turn away from the depressed and seek instead the society of the strong, the bold, the robust brains. Otherwise, and without profit to anyone, he will soon experience a depression from which discouragement may arise. Materially, the extent to which any individual can make himself useful to those who solicit him should be provided for, fulfilled, and never surpassed. 9. Equity. There is, moreover, a very simple criterion for judging well in matters of egotism and altruism. It consists in striving to act as it would be preferable for each one to act both in general and in particular cases. It is not necessary to say how a nation in which all individuals are guided by the idea of personal development, which allows each one a maximum of equilibrium, usefulness, activity, production, would soon see a decrease in sickness, mortality, strikes, cost of living, and crime. Nothing is more just, therefore, than to make, first of all, the psychic culture. In the face of an affliction, it is less important to remove ourselves from the painful impression by procuring for the sufferer an immediate, but often short-lived relief, than to ask ourselves what it would be better to do in order to suppress the cause, to love one's neighbor as oneself, and to do to him what would be preferable to be done to us. This is the formula of equity. Egotism allows altruism its greatest utilitarian power. The indecisive, the hesitant, the weak will never be of much help to anyone. While pursuing their way towards new and unceasing progress, towards the acquisition of ever more remarkable material advantages, the strong, on the other hand, are also capable of spreading all sorts of good around them. To be happy, it is not enough to receive more or less. It is also indispensable to give, to cheer, to help, to suppress the agents of disharmony that depend on our action. Conquering, on the other hand, by means of the developments indicated in this book, an ever wider mental horizon, one eliminates all meanness, all baseness, and all arbitrariness. Moral righteousness arises, in fact, from psychic equilibrium. Chapter 5. Major Energy Sources. 1. Isolation. This practice and those which follow are unanimously recommended by all specialists of the will. We will only describe them, suppressing all technical comments. Anyone can certainly try them, but in order to obtain the maximum effect, it seems to us indispensable that at least the principal rules already indicated be observed. Isolation consists in removing oneself from as many sources of perception as possible, and especially from one's habitual surroundings. Many very active men understand the importance of periodic isolation. Some leave their office or warehouse from Saturday to Monday and retire to some cottage situated far from all agitation, where nothing will remind them of business. In America, this system is generalized. Most of the busy people we see bustling on Broadway or Wall Street during the day, come the evening, they go to their secluded home in the suburbs of New York. There are many other ways of secluding oneself, such as getting up in the morning an hour earlier than usual, and going to sit in some little public garden, unless one prefers to walk quietly along a deserted street, or on Sundays, even if only for 1 or 2 hours, to leave one's home and go to the woods to digress and rest one's brain. When, during the day, after many hours of toil, one feels very tired, a quarter of an hour of wandering in the nearby streets is a useful rest. On the other hand, there are many occasions for practicing a kind of isolation: a trip by car, by tramway, by train, a wait in some office where one is busy, etc. The listener never misses a chance to do something. The listless never miss any of these occasions, but they do not know how to get out of their torpor at the desired moment. This is one of the reasons why we have said above that a certain amount of discipline is needed before we tackle this chapter. On the other hand, material isolation does not necessarily imply mental relaxation. There is no lack of examples of men for whom the change of environment does not permit that momentary inertia of thought, which is the only cause of rest foreseen for the practice of which we speak. Applying ourselves to the following exercise, we can, even in the midst of noise, of agitation, from 1 minute to another rarefy, then suspend the course of our thoughts. The best position, lying down, facilitates the suspension of mental operations, but even sitting down we can obtain the intended result, though somewhat more difficult in the beginning. First, let's apply ourselves to relax our muscles well, taking care first of the feet that must be supported, then the legs, the back, the neck, then the arms and hands. So check that the body rests with all its weight equally distributed, and half closing the eyelids, let's imagine to see the contours of our body and express inwardly the intention to re-enter ourselves. That is, to interrupt momentarily all contact with the outside. Continuing this first experiment during a time varying from 3 to 5 minutes, we will not delay to feel taken by a kind of pleasant torpor, accompanied by a freshness that you feel running along the muscles, along with a feeling of perfect rest. Secondly, we direct our attention to the thoughts that are already arising less tumultuously, taking care not to follow any of them. It seems then that the ideas pass before us almost unperceived. Soon, during short periods of 5, 10, 30 seconds, the mental vacuity remains almost complete, until a moment comes in which we think of nothing more. This deliciously languid state, which we know we can bring to an end as soon as we have the will to do so, rests better and more rapidly than the deepest sleep. For sleep is the suspension of only one part of psychic activity. With a little getting used to it, a few seconds are enough to put us completely into a state of isolation, during which we quickly regain our previous strength. Napoleon seems to have been acquainted with this procedure. Sometimes his officers saw him withdraw into the background and remain motionless as if he were deeply asleep. On the contrary, he was awake. If an urgent cause interrupted his recollection, he instantly manifested a complete lucidity of spirit. It is said, moreover, that his vigilance never slowed down, day or night. Certainly, thanks to a completely sufficient mode of rest, he was able to endure the crushing labors of his campaigns. 2. Meditation. It is more a question here of seeking new inspirations than of classifying ideas in relation to the goal which we propose to attain. After half an hour of systematic isolation, instead of closing one's consciousness to the notions that come to it, it is necessary, in order to meditate, to open it wide, allowing the whole chain of receptions, perceptions, and concepts, coming from outside or from the accumulation of mnemonics, to act. The only control that must be exercised consists in comparing each idea, as it manifests itself, with the great principles that we have adopted, and in rejecting precisely those ideas that do not conform to these principles, noting rapidly those that throw some new light on our plans, that specify a detail, a nuance, the opportunity of a decision that we have not yet completely decided to take, etc. Meditation actually brings new energies because it transforms ambitions into precise determinations and lets the multiple impressions that remain scattered in the subconscious gather into powerful beams that incite action. 3. Objectivation. As a remedy for every indecision, objectification is used when it is contrary to the will to go along with the best reasonableness. How often do we find ourselves faced with a lively temptation, the satisfaction of which, although it would give us immediate pleasure, would generate a whole series of undesirable consequences for the future? At such times it is advisable to represent to ourselves mentally, with the greatest precision, on the one hand, what would happen if we followed our impulsiveness, on the other, what motivates the repression of this impulsiveness. The founder of the Jesuit order, this phenomenon of fanatical will, who, from one day to the next, was able to yield to the transition from a life of excesses to monastic rigors, Ignatius of Loyola, subjected his disciples to objectification. He instructed them, for example, to imagine hell with its flames, to imagine themselves undergoing the torture experienced by the damned, the horror of the eternal prospect of such torment, etc. Thus, at the moment when it occurred to them, they would be able to experience the same torture as the damned. In this way, when the occasion of an error involving eternal punishment occurs to them, the terrifying images already objectified will be recalled, helping them to repress themselves. In ordinary life, objectification seems to us to be the key to righteousness. If we allowed ourselves the time to represent to ourselves in a complete form the logical consequences of our every act, we would paralyze most of the nefarious impulses from which none of us is exempt. To draw party from this process, we understand that some training is already needed to master us. When we are trying to determine ourselves for an effort, the same practice is well indicated. It consists, then, in the contemplation of the mental image, of the advantages we expect from the effort in question, in tasting in advance the satisfaction it would give us. It need not be said that the attention and the time given to this exercise are the measure of its efficacy. Generally speaking, the rapid objectification of what we wish to accomplish helps considerably in its accomplishment. When we draw up a plan, if instead of contenting ourselves with formulating its various elements abstractly, we represent them to ourselves in a concrete form, as precisely and vividly as possible, the best means of carrying it out arises clearly in our minds. 4. Concentration. We have already dealt briefly with the necessity of thinking of only one thing at a time, and of absorbing ourselves entirely of every object proposed to our attention by our reasoned deliberations. In order to attain a complete and intense concentration of the mind, there are various exercises. We have indicated the most elementary. Here are some new, gradual ones, by which he will obtain the greatest advantage who aims at practicing the direct influence of the will on his own organism, on the minds of others, and on the secondary causes of his own destiny. Strive in the course of ordinary life never to have your mental stability disturbed by the manifestations of the environment. Unless an objective reason determines you to do so after internal deliberation, Never allow yourself to be diverted from your way of thinking by any accident. If a piece of news is communicated to you while you are occupied in a given work, keep silence and do not allow your attention to be diverted. If an attempt is made to obtain your opinion, your consent, your approval, if an attempt is made to move you by flattering or mocking words, or by threats, do not allow yourself to be persuaded. Remain calm, phlegmatic. Do not speak. Do not explain your attitude. Do not even manifest impatience or discontent. All that matters is that you keep your first resolve, to resist an external derivative of your thought. Let the reactions exerted by your conduct on those around you pass. Do not feed them. Get into a comfortable position, relax your muscles, close your eyes, and mentally represent the graphic form of the number 1. When you have succeeded in constructing a precise image, move on to number 2, and continue in this way up to and including number 9. Once you are sufficiently trained, so that the parade of digits is carried out quickly and clearly, attack the series from 10 to 99, then from 100 to 999, and so on. This exercise, which tires from the beginning, performed calmly, develops elasticity of mind, attention, and willpower. Choose an object of simple but somewhat special shape, a small bottle, for example, with original contours. Place it in front of you, at a distance of about 1 meter, and resuming the previous position, study well the aspect of your bottle. From time to time, close your eyes and mentally represent the model in question, until the image you are trying to form assumes a perfect contour, until you can only imagine a portion of it. Persist in comparing the real bottle with the imaginary one. Finally, when you possess the form of the model, keep it intact. Reconstruct it if it becomes evanescent, and keep your thought in this representation of the intellect as much as you can. Take a paper and 2 pencils. Try to draw a circle with one hand, a square with the other. Looking at a photograph or drawing from your memories, construct line by line, in your mind, the portrait of a person. If it is someone you meet often, as soon as you have closed your eyes, you will think you have succeeded. In reality, it is the general impression arising from the physiognomy in question that you will have remembered, while the object of the proposed exercise consists in imagining the face of the subject with such precision and completeness that you can use this imagination as a model for drawing a picture. You must not expect to succeed at once, but by trying often, you will succeed. After getting used to mental concentration with isolated objects, you can move on to more complex images. Your office, or your bedroom, with all the small elements it contains, will serve as a useful model. Suppose you are standing at the threshold of the door, looking inward and examining in minute detail everything in the doorway, starting on the right and ending on the left. To complete the exercise, imagine an overall view, trying to maintain it with all its precision for a quarter of an hour or 20 minutes. On the tram, on the train, in the street, or at the theater, fix your gaze on the back of a person with the precise intention of seeing him turn around. You must not constantly repeat to yourself, "I want him to look back, I want him to look back," but affirm this volition in a concrete and animated form. Suppose that your subject feels the irresistible need to turn around, and that after a moment he makes this movement, which you must see clearly in advance. It usually takes from 2 to 5 minutes to obtain this result. Even if this movement cannot be determined, the exercise has its full effect for the one who performs it. 5. Autosuggestion. Autosuggestion means mentally repeating to ourselves an injunction, an affirmation, in order to implant it firmly in the brain so that it may eventually dominate contrary tendencies or elements. At the beginning of the researches undertaken on hypnotism, several practitioners were struck to see that a suggestion imposed on a patient exerted on him a very deep influence, even in the waking state. Among the factors that come into play in the production of hypnosis is the expectant attention, that is, the fixed idea of the subject expecting to be asleep. During hypnotic sessions, it often happens that 2 or 3 persons fall asleep while watching the hypnotist hypnotizing other subjects. They imagine so intensely what the hypnotized person must be feeling that this idea determines in them effects similar to those felt by the subject in the experiment that is carried out before their eyes. It is known, on the other hand, that when the field of consciousness is grasped by a single idea, it exerts an extraordinary influence upon the individual. We shall see in the next chapter how this influence reacts upon the depths of the organism and how it can bring about important perturbations or the healing of diseases thought to be incurable. After having acquired a certain faculty of concentration, autosuggestion will render you the greatest service. The simplest mode of autosuggestion, and also the least powerful, consists in the mechanical repetition of a formula, for example, of those recommended in the first chapter. When the development of the will begins, their weak action is valuable, and the little attention they require puts them within the reach of all. But in order to assure ourselves deep and rapid results, it is better to proceed by images. In order to develop, for example, any quality, after having well defined what this quality consists of, and all the good results it allows, we must imagine that we are already in possession of this attribute and see ourselves acting accordingly. Therefore, we must not repeat verbally or mentally, "I possess the will, I have memory," but we must try to live with our thoughts different circumstances in which will or memory are manifested. When it is a question of combating a defect, it is well to objectify first of all its consequences, then the advantages which would be gained by getting rid of it. Then, as before, we represent various scenes from real life. The different occasions on which we are victims of the defect in question can be evoked concretely, imagining each time that we dominate the impulse or temptation and experience the satisfaction of this victory. Immediately before sleep, autosuggestion works most effectively. Many people, even those who are not familiar with psychic culture, are familiar with the process of waking up at a given time. At the moment of falling asleep, the concentration of the mind on why one should get up the next day at such a time is generally sufficient for the purpose, but it involves a somewhat agitated sleep. Preferably, instead of thinking of the opportunity of not missing the train or the planned appointment, it is better to represent the appearance of the objects that will surround us at the moment we would like the sleep to be interrupted, the noises that will come from outside into the bedroom at that moment, the awakening in all its details, associating this idea with the previous ones. Finally, when the numbness, precursor of psychic inertia, begins to make itself felt, we must tell ourselves several times that the desired result will take place. There are constant autosuggestions from which a powerful comfort emanates. The feeling of physical well-being, resulting from the observance of rational hygiene, tends to consolidate optimism, self-confidence, calmness, energy. It helps to keep us in the mental disposition of hope and contentment. It gives the mind all sorts of ideas strength. Here are some examples. I shall be able to master all difficulties. I am determined to succeed. I have all that is necessary to act profitably in the present circumstances. I am on the road to success. From day to day my strength increases. My assimilation is more precise. My will is stronger, etc., etc. Words count for little. Words count for little. Previous thoughts are formed differently in each brain. We must adhere with all our intelligence to these incitements and remember them when needed. Sometimes autosuggestion in a less directly affirmative form harmonizes better with the personality, especially in the shy, the hesitant, the depressed. The latter, even when they present themselves with the best autosuggestion images, feel doubtful about their effectiveness. More than one person has confided to us that he submitted passively to the exercises described by us. But even if he followed them, an inner voice, that of doubt, insinuated to him, "You are too low, too weak-willed. You will not succeed. This has no effect on you," etc. In such cases, the solution consists in proceeding progressively, replacing, for instance, the affirmation, "I am calm," with this, "I feel less agitated. From day to day I will feel less nervous, and soon I will become completely calm." Similarly, in order to combat by means of autosuggestion an inveterate habit, the gradual system seems the best, the safest. We begin by representing to ourselves as powerful the needs to satisfy the habit we wish to get rid of, adding that the very manifestation of the need will be accompanied by a principle of repugnance. We will continue each day, slightly diminishing the harmful incitement and increasing the repulsion connected with it. About autosuggestion, we can repeat to you that the smallest effort leaves a lasting trace in the mind. Nothing is lost in the psychic field, and the faltering attempt of today prepares the energetic and victorious reaction of tomorrow. 6. Transformation of forces. We have already insisted upon the correlation of physiological balance and psychic development. Most mental illnesses improve after a few weeks of detoxification. The culture of the will requires, first of all, at least a few quarter hours a day in the beginning, the harmony of organic functions. Some psychists go further. Starting from the principle of the unity of force acquired by modern physics, they claim that mental energy can be derived from any physical source. The pupil, says Turnbull, in his course of personal magnetism, after secluding himself, will have to keep himself completely upright and draw the muscles of his body as rigidly as he can. Here we are in the presence of a force created, but not employed. The spirit of the pupil will then ardently bring itself to bear upon the desire which must be satisfied. The force, physical expression, that is, the rigidity of the muscles, will transform into force mental expression. According to another order of ideas, the followers of the Oriental schools practice deep breathing by concentrating their mind and their attention in order to draw to themselves the ambient forces and incorporate them. Inhaling the air slowly, the yogi thinks, I absorb the energies scattered throughout the atmosphere. He keeps the inhaled air in his lungs for a second, thinking, I fix these energies in me. Then he sends out the inhaled air, saying, I expel the air, but I retain in its entirety the forces which it contained and which I have appropriated to myself. Wherever a quantity of activity is used, it is possible to pick up a part of it by means of a simple mental effort, analogous to that of respiratory absorption, so at least occultists and theosophists affirm. Turnbull teaches in his course already quoted, how to draw start from the strength of one's desires. The theory of this author, though bold, seems to us to deserve serious consideration. Desire in all its forms, he writes, is a mental current charged with power, that same power precisely which the magnetic man exerts upon his fellow man. When I say mental current, I am speaking literally. I am not merely using a metaphor. When you give in to desire, you are wasting your strength and thus diminishing your power of attraction. The force of desire manifests itself under a great number of mental currents, such as impatience, anger, carelessness, or vanity. This last current is the one which probably weakens you the most. The way to proceed, therefore, is, as soon as you feel a current of desire, to refuse to satisfy it. By this conscious effort of your will, you isolate yourself from the debilitating discharge. Do not think that this habit of repressing your impulses will produce a state of torpor, whereby desire will be annihilated. The effect is the opposite. Desire increases tenfold in strength. In spite of some obscurity, we understand very well the thought of the quoted author. To accumulate energies whose use seems useless means to build a sort of mental battery, an expression used by Turnbull, a reserve on which one will draw to act and want to act. All physical agents can be considered as sources of mental comfort. By activating and regularizing the exchanges, hydrotherapy, for example, powerfully invigorates the nerves and the brain. Sunbathing, high-frequency currents, and especially physiological magnetism have an excellent effect. It is not necessary to say that it is necessary to draw upon these sources in order to utilize the stimulus found therein for personal strivings of volitional culture, and that no one would know how to substitute for the application and training of his faculties the action external to himself of physical agents or magnetic influence. Finally, we would like to point out the complete naturist cures that are practiced in the different sanatoriums, and that, according to those who have tried them, operate a real physical and moral renewal. Chapter 6. The direct power of the will on the organism and the way to exercise it. 1. The will put into action during hypnosis. Until recent years, only the so-called striated fibers were considered as directly dependent upon the will. The so-called smooth fibers, according to physiologists, escaped this action. Hypnotic experience showed from the beginning that the fixed idea imposed by suggestion affected, contrary to previous principles, every region of the body. Particularly astonishing in this respect were the proofs of vesication accomplished by means of hypnotic suggestion. Here are some taken from the work Hypnotism and Suggestion by that great scientific authority, Dr. Grasset. Dr. Luigi Pregomini, having put a sick woman to sleep, suggested applying a vesicant to her. Instead of this vesicant, he only put the paper on which he had written the prescription. The blistering took place, and the sore suppurated during a period that lasted from 10 to 15 days. Focachin, a pharmacist in Charmes, suggested to a woman who was suffering from pain in the upper left inguinal region that a blister would form on the sore spot. The next day there was a blister. Another day, as she was complaining of neuralgia in the right clavicular region, he suggested a similar suggestion to her. Numerous burns were produced, resembling well-formed points of fire, and leaving real scabs. With Focachin, the doctors Leibold, Bernheim, Leigwas, and Bunis renewed the experience, and noted that the epidermis had become thick and deadened, of a yellowish-white color, over an area of 4 to 5 centimeters. This region of the skin was surrounded by an area of intense redness with swelling, about half an inch wide. Buru and Barat drew the name of a sleeping patient with a blunt stiletto on his 2 forearms, and said to him, "This evening at 4 o'clock the lines which I have drawn on your arms will bleed." On the paralyzed side nothing was produced, but on the healthy side the characters appeared in reddish relief, and even a few drops of blood appeared in several places. Mabille determined by means of suggestion a series of cutaneous hemorrhages, drawing in the same way the letters of his own name over an arm, a thigh, and a forehead. At the Salpêtrière, Charcot and his students, say Binet and Ferret, have frequently produced among the hypnotized people burns by means of suggestion. All hypnotists agree that suggestion decreases and even totally suppresses sensitivity. Hypnotic anesthesia has been verified by many clinicians such as Broca, Esquirel, Fallon, Estelle, Elliotson, Charcot, Dumont-Pallier, Barillon, to mention only the main authorities. Even in the lightest state of complete hypnosis, as we describe it in our modern scientific method of magnetism, hypnotism, and suggestion, one can obtain by a simple statement of will insensibility of the skin. We have even gone so far as to propose to the waking state the insensitization of a vast region of the body. Many successful attempts were made at the faculty of Nancy by Dr. Bunis to test the influence of suggestion on the heart. The beats of this organ, recorded by the cardiograph, gave from 6 to 13 pulsations per minute under the effect of an assertion that the rhythmic slowing down would take place. In a similar order of ideas, Mers and Hellich, Grasset tells us in his work already cited, realized by means of suggestion the decreases in temperature that reach 34 degrees 5. By what process do such phenomena take place? Certainly, by the vascular motor pathway. The idea imposed by suggestion reacts upon the nervous system, and its action extends to the branches of the latter, around the small vessels of the circulatory system. Everyone knows that certain emotions cause a blushing of the face, while others cause a momentary pallor. Shy people who enter into an environment that shocks them immediately feel an impression that has the effect of contracting the vascular fibrils of the face and pushing a visible flow of blood through the epidermis. Fear acts in the opposite way. It causes a relaxation of the fibrils in question, and thus a reflux of blood. The hypnotic clinic has been able to compose large annals, reading which everyone can be convinced how the suggested idea, repeated, maintained for a long time in the field of consciousness, exerts a curative modification, not only according to what is commonly thought in nervous diseases, but also in purely organic diseases. Functional disturbances of the stomach, intestines, heart, and also of the lungs, kidney or liver, tumors, fibrous bodies. All pathological cases have been submitted to the treatment of suggestion. The number of positive results obtained allows us to take this truth for granted. Thought acts on the organism. Hypnosis appears to be an abnormal state in which psychic phenomena seem to assume an exceptional authority over physical phenomena. But we shall see that, if in provoked sleep there are particularly evident manifestations of the law of the influence of the moral on the physical, this same law appears sometimes with the same distinctness in the waking state. 2. The profound effects of the idea on the waking state. We could cite marvelous examples from embryological psychology of cases in which the emotion, the idea, the state of mind of the mother had a definite effect on the child. But we prefer to limit ourselves to facts of autosuggestion performed by the brain of the individual upon himself. War has made known to us the kind of momentary dissociation which the consciousness of the combatant has with his physical sensibility. Enraptured by the ardor of battle, the unfortunate man, who is so severely stricken that in ordinary life he would have immediately felt violent pain, is often aware of his wounds only at the sight of the flowing blood. We have been told of the case of a man who, after having received 17 bullets, continued to fight until the end of the attack. Then he said he felt a kind of sickness for which he was taken to the ambulance. Taken from thence to a hospital, he died there a few hours later, without having complained in any remarkable way. Here is another more characteristic example. A young mother is busy tidying up a cupboard of china, the hands of which are full. Her little boy is playing on the floor at the far end of the room, near the unlit hearth. By dint of touching the mechanism of the fireplace, he pulls off the fire chain, and the curtain of the fireplace is about to fall on his pious neck, which is kneeling in the position of the guillotine, the curtain acting as a blade. In the moment before the fall of the metal curtain, the mother turns her head. She glimpses the danger that threatens her son. Under the influence of the impression, according to the consecrated expression, she feels a rush of blood. As this woman is impressionable and nervous, an erythematous and raised circle is instantly formed around her neck, at the very point where the child was about to be struck. This demographic impression of first degree lasted intensely enough and for a sufficient time, so that a doctor who came a few hours later could see it. Quoted by Duchatel and Warcolier in their work, The Miracles of the Will. We observed in the Practical School of Magnetism in 1915 a case in which the action is shown to be extremely rapid. The subject, who was taking the courses of the school, and particularly the anatomy course, experienced a sensation of disturbance of every region described by the professor. In the pathology course, listening to the description of these or those symptoms caused Mr. C discomforts exactly corresponding to each of them. The description of a surgical operation caused him unbearable pains in the same region where the surgical operation mentioned before him took place. It will be said that these are anomalies and that a healthy individual does not present such phenomena. It is precisely these exceptional cases that bring to light the law of reaction of the thinking ego upon the rest of the organism, a law that remains constant for all, with this difference, that for some, a greater amount of psychic activity is required than for others, in order to bring about a precise physical repercussion. Thus, we have an indication of a power latent in each one of us, and which must be developed if it is to be exercised voluntarily and powerfully. Some Eastern secret organizations that have dedicated themselves to this kind of culture, dervishes, fakirs, yogis, have pushed the power over themselves to extremely extended limits. They face the fire without burning themselves, pierce their flesh without manifesting any pain, produce wounds which heal instantly, suspend all internal movement of their bodies, then bury themselves for several weeks. After the stipulated time has elapsed, they spontaneously return to life. Reports of scenes of this kind abound in the writings of English notabilities who have traveled through and observed India. In Africa there are still to be found certain fanatics who have acquired by long training the power of provoking upon themselves phenomena quite analogous to those of which India has given us testimony. Here, in this connection, are some passages quoted by Messrs. Duchatel and Warcolier in their work already cited, according to the New Word. Mr. Penney asked the marabout if he knew any physical or physiological secrets, for example, if he could withstand the test of fire. The marabout answered that he did. He immediately put his hand on the flame of a candle burning on the table, kept it there for several minutes, and withdrew it with his skin smoked, without burns and without having apparently suffered. Mr. Bastianini, who was present, not caring if the flame actually burned, thought of doing the test, imitating the marabout, but he could not keep his hand on the flame only for 2 or 3 seconds, withdrawing it immediately, feeling burned. The next day he told Mr. Penney that his hand still hurt, his palm was still a little swollen. The second sheik stood up. He took a dagger and inserted the point into his mouth, piercing his left cheek in such a way that the point came out. Not a drop of blood oozed out. The marabout did not show any sign of suffering. Not only that, but he then inserted 4 daggers, 1 in his right cheek, 1 in his throat, and 2 in his arms. At our command, he drew the 2 daggers from his mouth, then the 1 from his throat, and the other 2 from his arms, even now without a drop of blood and without the slightest trace of wound. Only on his arm there were 2 small marks like bruises. Then he withdrew to the back of the room, uncovered his belly, took the saber, and passed it from one side of his mouth to the other. Then, speaking incomprehensible words and jumping, began to give himself strong blows with the saber in the belly. Asking him to give himself sharp strokes and to slide the saber up and down, resting the blade on the flesh, he obeyed. Having ordered him to cease, we examined the blade, which was, as before, very sharp. On the belly of the marabout, we found no cut, but only a few slightly red stripes, which were also similar to bruises, or rather to the mark left by a tight tie, a thin string, for instance. The Medium Home in London in 1870 showed at a séance attended by Sir Russell Wallace how he could handle hot coals at length without feeling the slightest pain or trace of burning. 3. What can the idea reflect an example? In all the foregoing, we feel ourselves to be in the field of the supernatural, and the reader may well ask himself what use the direct power of the will over the organism can be to such an individual as he, who is normal and lacks the time necessary for long training. We wish to show him that the modern Westerner living the common life and possessing sufficient knowledge of the data of psychism, especially if he has begun to cultivate his will by the methods we have described in the first 4 chapters of this book, can exert a very profound influence over his organs. The autosuggestion, we shall recall, was, it is true, obtained by an illustrious man in the world of psychic sciences, but his absolutely desperate case presented an unprecedented difficulty that seemed well proportioned to the energetic resources of the eminent practitioner in question, Professor Hector d'Urville. The latter, suffering from a severe form of uremia in 1913, was prostrated by a purulent pleurisy, an epiphenomenon of his renal disease. Several doctors diagnosed the disease and declared it incurable. Coughing all the time, d'Urville writes in his Psychic Therapeutics, "I sometimes spat out a liter of pus a day, blood and purulent matter, and like all those around him, I was absolutely waiting for the fatal instant." Even we, who at that time were in daily contact with the patient and had learned to have the greatest confidence in his magnetic force, already regretted to see him prematurely torn away from science, from the admiration of his collaborators, from the affection of his family. Against all expectations, he did not die, and after a few weeks, he announced to us that he had decided to begin his own treatment and that he was absolutely sure of recovery. Unsparingly expansive, he did not speak of the exact procedures he intended to use. He only described them later in his pamphlet already quoted, from which we take these lines. "My thoughts were always exclusively oriented towards healing. With the greatest confidence in the result I was expecting, I practiced deep breathing as much as possible. Putting my hands on my left lung during inhalation, I said to myself mentally or in a whisper, 'I call to my rescue the forces of nature necessary for healing.' Holding my breath, I absorbed the healing forces to add them to my own. During exhalation, I expel the gas and the products of malnutrition. This triple operation, often repeated during 1 hour, both during the day and the night, gave me very remarkable physical and moral forces that were used by the organism, and a sensible improvement was always the consequence. I varied this self-suggestive absorption in many ways. Sometimes, with both hands applied to the diseased lung, I said to myself, 'I absorb the forces of nature to heal the lung. I fix these forces in the organ that will use them. I expel the products of malnutrition.' In a similar way, I acted on the kidneys, the heart, the stomach, and any other organ in urgent need of care. I also tried to balance the organs with each other. To the amazement of those who witnessed the initial serious crisis, the patient made a visible recovery, and the doctors considered it a unique phenomenon. Later, in order to complete the cure, he gave himself to psychic action, precisely limited to the renal function. Applying, he says, the palm of my left hand to the posterior face of the left kidney, which was the sickest, and the palm of my right hand to the anterior face, I represented the organ in the best possible way, directing my thought first from the exterior to the interior in order to penetrate and saturate it completely. After a while, still with my thought clearly defined, I said to myself mentally or in a voice, from the hilum, concave part, I penetrate into the interior by means of the artery, following its divisions and subdivisions up to the small arteries, and back through the small veins, the subdivisions and divisions of the renal vein. Having completed this course, they re-enter the nerve which accompanies the artery to the small arteries, telling me, I penetrate through the sensitive part of the nerve and follow its divisions and subdivisions to their ends and return to the motor part of the nerves. From there I penetrate and heal them. This practice, repeated daily for several months, led to the complete healing of the patient who today enjoys greater health and strength than ever before. His psychic faculties have increased due to the overdevelopment imposed on them by the effort to which they were forced by the disease. The anatomic physiological knowledge necessary to treat oneself in this way, in such a serious case, can be acquired by everyone, but even if one possessed only some very elementary notions, taken from a brief monograph, this would be enough to attempt effectively on oneself the self-medicating action of thought. 4. The curative action of the idea has been used in every age. In Chaldea, in Persia, in Egypt, among the Greeks and the Romans, one finds in the history of the medical art of those times remembered a series of practices to make the imagination of the sick act in order to determine their recovery. Strabo, Diodorus of Sicily, Pausanias, Prospero Alpini, have noted the invocations with which the Egyptians implored Isis or Anubis for the relief of their ills and attest the good effects they obtained. The medicine in the times very much in vogue in Greece and Rome enjoyed universal confidence. After having at length begged the gods protectors of the place to free them from their sufferings, the patients, the chronicler tells us, fell asleep, and a certain number of them woke up completely cured. From the primitive peoples, the mysterious therapy was perpetuated. In the Middle Ages it was maintained by witch doctors, and even now in certain parts of the world it has its practitioners and followers. Is it any wonder? Faith heals, Charcot said. Well, faith creates the fixed idea, the involuntary mental concentration, and every virtue of the recipes of the Red Dragon, as well as those of the prayers addressed to any other divinity, are nothing but the effort of the will towards the idea of healing. In Boston there is a powerful association called Christian Science. Imbued with a Buddhist cosmogony, which we need not examine here, the adherents of this sect, assembled in ceremonies inspired by their metaphysical concepts, address a prayer to God that the disease, which according to them is nothing but an imbalance, one in harmony, may disappear, as D'Urville writes in his Psychic Therapy, like the shadow from a room into which light is allowed to penetrate by opening the shutters. These sectarians operate numerous cures, among which there are, in imposing proportion, cases desperate for any other medical treatment. All religions have their places of pilgrimage, where, as in the temples of antiquity, an invisible being venerated is ardently invoked. The most celebrated temple in France, Lourdes, is organized with theatrical luxury, acting on the imagination of the sick, and all the more powerfully the more fanatical or primitive they are. The disposition of their nervous system seems to have its importance, for it is always the most pious who enjoy the return to health. If the imagination used passively reacts in pathological states, how can we doubt that this same consciously directed faculty, guided by experimental certainty replacing blind faith, has considerable power over the organism? For in the last analysis, it appears evident that the direct determinant of the effects considered is the mental image of the state of health, imposed by external influence or deliberately conceived. We shall see how to derive from what we have said a practical method of curative autosuggestion. 5. Individual applications. Mental concentration does not imply, as we might expect, fatiguing nervous tension. On the contrary, this is our thesis. Calmness is the first condition that must be realized for self-influence. Whether it is an illness or a more or less serious disturbance, it does not matter. Lie down, relax your muscles, and imagine what you would feel when in perfect health. You would feel nothing but well-being. Think of the state of calm. Represent this state to yourself by quietly telling yourself that it will not be long before it appears in you. For about 10 minutes, try not to move. Immobility has a healthy effect and brings about the inertia of intellectual impulsiveness. After striving to be without movement for a quarter of an hour, we no longer feel the desire to move. The imaginary representation of well-being gradually attenuates the pain, the discomfort, and tends to regularize the feverish state. If you do not have the necessary physiological knowledge to understand exactly what is happening in your organism, to represent your organs, be content to think of a slight but appreciable improvement. Repeat this fiction over and over again, not only with a verbal or mental formula such as, "I shall not delay in feeling better," but also and above all by imagining what you wish to feel. Diminution of pain, pleasant general torpor, drowsiness, complete sleep, etc. The difficulty of curative autosuggestion lies in the opposing resistance of the influx of ideas relating to the evil from which one suffers, to its inconveniences, to the delayed work, to the impossibility of following such a project, to the anxiety it causes, etc. In this case, we must have recourse to reason and consider that the surest means of shortening the duration of the time rendered useless lies in dissociating as completely as possible from all other notions the desire to recover, which, by directing the internal forces, facilitates and accelerates the return to the normal state. Not, it must be said, that the observance of hygiene remains indispensable. Otherwise, the psychic action exercised upon oneself would meet with an antagonistic element. The certainty of being placed in the best conditions desired to bring about a relief is intrinsically medical. Almost all sick people experience a slight improvement, sometimes a great improvement, as soon as they have received the comfort of a good word from their doctor. When they have heard the latter say to them, "You are suffering from such and such an illness. Here are the necessary remedies which will not be long in doing you good. You will get well very quickly," or something similar, a relaxation of their state of anxiety is produced. The energy which they had been dissipating by anxiously awaiting the physician then remains in them. They find themselves immediately invigorated by it. Directing one's thoughts to the place of the diseased organ, one can advantageously make use of the breathing and absorption of energy. Calmly, without haste, without fear, let us inhale the air slowly, imagining that with it we are introducing into ourselves the forces scattered in the atmosphere. Let us conserve the inhaled air for a few moments, thinking that we are fixing the energy it contains. Then let us expel it from the lungs, telling ourselves at that moment that we expel only the gas and the products of digestion, but that we retain the absorbed dynamizing elements. As soon as our efforts fail us, let us suspend them in order to give ourselves up to isolation. Then let us begin again to direct our psychic activity toward the sick region, maintaining the idea that it will soon recover its normal state. D'Urville recommends that you speak to your organs as if they were family servants, gently and persistently instructing them to function properly. Several times a day, especially in the evening in bed before going to sleep, and during the night, during moments of insomnia, isolate yourself so as not to think about anything. Relax your muscles, and in this state of apparent calm, speak to your cells, your organs, your organism in general to calm or excite it according to your needs, and you will be completely amazed to see that they obey, excite or calm themselves according to your desire. Therefore, address them as you would address a familiar person. If you want to heal this person or his organs by the action of thought, by such action, a kind of induction is produced, which acts immediately. In acute illnesses, when the first crisis is followed by persistent depression or semi-unconsciousness, we lack the energetic resources necessary for self-suggestion. We can, however, try to drive away thoughts of discouragement, sadness, anxiety, fear, to replace them with contrary ideas. As we have said before, a certain preliminary training of the will facilitates the influence of the moral on the physical in case of illness. Let us add that as soon as the psychic development has reached a certain degree, a sort of dissociation of the ego with the impressions and sensations that come to it is produced. Like spectators, we witness what is going on in our organism without taking a full part in it. The ego, under the action of the disease, seems to be a king immobilized by his servants, who nevertheless retain enough influence over them to force them to let him go. In chronic diseases of long duration, more or less prolonged pauses give the patient the necessary time to study his case in a treatise on pathology, to understand it well, or to treat it with the greatest precision by means of clear mental representations. The example we have cited shows what is to be expected from this method. On the other hand, even faltering, the effort of the thought, or at least of the will to direct one's thinking towards the idea of relief or healing, always determines sufficient results for which we can have faith in the autosuggestion therapy. Chapter 7. Direct Power of Will Over Others. 1. The legendary power of magicians. Magic is commonly defined, the supposed art of performing wonders contrary to the laws of nature. Whoever, in spite of this, wishes to read the works of the contemporary neo-occultist school, of Vronsky, Eliplius Levi, Stanislaus de Goethe, Incos, Paladin, and others, will find therein, with serious documentation, confirmed that antiquity knew the secret of a psychic development, giving a real power of voluntary influence on others. Among the Persians, magic was a priesthood, the practice of which was entrusted to scholars, to wise men, who received the title of magicians. The word magic therefore evokes an idea of greatness, of majesty. The occult science was taught only in sanctuaries, in the most absolute secrecy, so that the operating manual had to fatally disappear with the ancient civilizations. Historians, philosophers, doctors, poets cite numerous facts. The tablets covered with inscriptions, the votive offerings hanging on the walls of the temples, the hieroglyphics of the bas-reliefs, and the various monuments that have escaped the destruction of time and wars, have told us that the mysterious practices of occultism were widespread everywhere, above all in Egypt, in India, in Chaldea, in Greece. In the 1st century of our era, there still existed two strange types of initiates, the last probably to whom the wisdom of the old times has reached in its integrity, Apollonius of Tyana and Simon Magus. The former, esteemed for his power, had as his historian Philostratus, who thus recounts one of the 1,000 phenomena to which Apollonius owed his celebrity. An unmarried maiden was believed to be dead. Her fiancé followed the coffin, moaning as he does when the hope of marriage has failed, and all Rome wept with him, because the maiden was of consoling fairies. Apollonius, in the face of so much grief, ordered, "Lay down the coffin, I charge me to make your tears cease." And he asked the name of the maiden. Almost all those who attended the funeral thought he was about to begin a speech, as is customary on such occasions to excite the tears. But Apollonius only touched the girl and spoke a few words. Suddenly the presumed dead girl seemed to come out of her sleep. She screamed and returned to her father's house like Alceste, who had been brought back to life by Hercules. Simon the magician, one of the founders of the Gnostic school, also acquired a very large reputation by working, like Christ and the apostles, of whom he was a contemporary, numerous miracles and healings. But in spite of his power, he made it clear that he considered the power of the apostles superior to his own. In fact, with money he wanted to buy from Peter the secrets of his power, hence the name of simony. This conception was shared by numerous thinkers of every age. Goethe said, "A soul can by its mere presence act powerfully upon another soul." We have in us like electrical and magnetic forces similar to the magnet itself. Depending on whether we come into contact with similar or dissimilar bodies, we attract or repel them. 2. The theorists of psychism in the 16th and 17th centuries. The principal keys to the power of the will, as exercised by the ancients, seem to have been irretrievably lost since the 1st centuries of our era. From time to time, however, some intuitive spirit has glimpsed the reality of the action exercised, even at a distance, by human beings over their fellow human beings. Marsilio Ficino affirms that the spirit, being agitated by violent desires, can act not only on its own body, but also on a nearby body, especially if this body is uniform in its nature and is weaker. 3. The magnetizers. From Paracelsus, who healed at a distance, to Dupotet, author of a true course in psychic influence at a distance, published under the title Magic Unveiled, All magnetizers have known and appreciated the characteristic action of the will. Mesmer provoked crises in his patients by hiding in a nearby room and acting through the walls. Camillus Flammarion relates in his admirable work, Death and Its Mystery, according to Dr. Kerner, how at the court of Hungary, Mesmer was asked by the Dr. Seifert to reproduce the experiment of which we have just spoken, and how he succeeded to the amazement of the latter. Dupuisiger mentally suggests his somnambulists and carefully distinguishes, in his theory, the magnetism characteristic of the organism from the psychic influence set in motion by the will. The already mentioned Dupotet operates healings at a distance. Finally, D'Urville, much more expert than the preceding ones in what concerns the action of the will at a distance, boldly maintains with the occultists and theosophists that every thought externalizes itself from the one who emits it in order to reach the one to whom it refers. 4. Modern facts of thought communication. In our modern scientific method of hypnotism, magnetism, and suggestion, we have recalled a number of these facts. Examples of these phenomena abound so abundantly that they are scarcely questioned by anyone. Every day new documents are added to the mass of those already collected. Camillus Flammarion, to whom belongs the honor of having been the first to give himself to a systematic investigation on the subject, at least in France by his work already mentioned, makes a new contribution to the study of telepathy. For those of our readers who have not yet taken an interest in this study, here are 2 extracts from observations published by Flammarion, a report communicated by Dr. Poisson de Passavant. 1. 2 months ago, while I was in Belfort, I suddenly and with singular intensity thought of a colleague of mine from the Jura, whom I do not think of even once a year. A few minutes later I found myself face to face with him at a crossroads, and since he was riding his bicycle on a perpendicular road, it was impossible for me to have seen him from a distance. 2. As a doctor by profession, I am often inconvenienced during the night. Many people pass in front of my door, but if a person comes to knock on it, I wake up when it is still 20 yards from my house. I know in advance that he will ring the bell. This I have observed not once, but 100 times for the last 12 years. Second case of thought communication, this time in a dream. On January 9, 1909, I came to Montiers to spend a few hours with my parents, and I left them in good health. A few days later, my mother gave me news of her and my father. They were well. On the night of January 30th to 31st, I dreamed that I arrived at my parents' house. In the living room I see a crowd huddled over a makeshift bed. I scan the people around the bed and see my father lying dead on a mattress placed on trestles. The next day I was informed that my father had been taken ill on the eve of my visit, in the evening, at about 11 o'clock, and had died at 5:30, at the very moment when I had this sad nightmare. They had laid him on a bed similar to the one I had seen in my dream, and in the drawing room as the apparition had shown him to me. We repeat that thousands of such facts have been collected, and they clearly show how sometimes, without deliberate intention, the thought of one being communicates itself to another and imposes itself upon his attention. 5. Mental suggestion. The authors of the Prolegomena of modern hypnotism seem not to have been concerned with the possibility of carrying out the suggestions, formulating them exclusively in thought. Professor Charles Richet, to our knowledge, was the first to have the idea of putting some of his subjects to sleep at a distance in the hospital, and he succeeded at once. A little later, Dr. Okeroix of the University of Lemberg made a series of experiments and researches on mental suggestion. In our modern scientific method of magnetism, hypnotism, and suggestion, we have reproduced the report of the experiments of Havre, which are so conclusive. Here are some of the attempts made by Okeroix. Placing himself at a distance of several meters from one of his patients, and pretending to be busy writing, he gives the patient a series of orders which obtain the following effects. 1. Raise his right hand. He looks at the subject through the fingers of the left hand resting on his forehead. First minute, no action. Second minute, agitation of the right hand. Third minute, the agitation increases, the patient frowns and raises his right hand. 2. Get up and come to me. He leads him back to his seat without saying anything. The patient frowns, becomes agitated, gets up slowly, and with difficulty goes to him with an outstretched hand. 3. Take off the bracelet with your left hand and give it to me. No action. He extends his hand. Left, gets up and goes to a spectator. Then goes to a piano, and this probably bumping into his right arm, pushes it in the direction of his left arm, concentrating the patient's thought on the order received. The patient takes off his bracelet, seems to think, and hands it over. 4. Stand up, move the chair closer to the table, and sit next to us. He frowns, gets up and walks towards the doctor. He says, I need to do a few more things. He searches, touches a tray, moves a glass of tea, picks up an armchair, pushes it towards the table with a smile of satisfaction, and sits down, not being able to take it any more from tiredness. As in all cases of spontaneous transmission of thought, there is no lack of documents on suggestion men. Such, and it would require 10 volumes like this to bring together the principal ones. It must not be supposed that we have reproduced the most extraordinary examples. On the contrary, we have taken examples at random. From the mass of facts verified not by professional experimenters, but by independent researchers, we take the following, as Flammarion reports it to us. It is due to a colleague of his, Mr. Schmall. On July 9, 1897, it was warm weather and overcast. I was doing the kilo, lounging in a hammock suspended in my dining room and reading a pamphlet by Edmund Gurney. The clock was striking 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Not far from me rested my wife in an armchair sleeping soundly. Seeing her so, the thought came to me of mentally ordering her to wake up. I looked at her fixedly, and, concentrating all my will on the imperious order, I shouted in my mind, "Wake up! I want you to wake up." 3 or 4 minutes passed without my obtaining the slightest result. My wife continued to sleep peacefully. I then gave up the experiment, saying to myself, I shall be very surprised to see it succeed. But I began it again a few minutes later, without more success. Then I went back to reading and forgot all about my unsuccessful attempt. Suddenly, 10 minutes later, my wife woke up, rubbed her eyes, and looking at me with an air of surprise and a little bored, said, "What do you want from me? Why do you wake me up?" She says to me, "I didn't tell you anything. Yea, you're harassing me to get me up. You're kidding. I didn't open my mouth. Would I then have dreamed?" She said hesitantly, "Yes, it's true. I remember now. I just knew. Tell me what you dreamed. It might be interesting." I asked her, smiling. "I had a very unpleasant dream," she said. "I thought I was at the Rond Point in Courbevoie. It was windy and the weather was heavy. Suddenly I saw a human form, a man or a woman, wrapped in a white cloth, rolling down the slope. It made a lot of effort to get up. I wanted to rush to her aid, but I felt myself held back by an influence of which I was not aware at first. And I came to understand that it was you who wanted to make me abandon the image of the dream. Come on, wake up. You were shouting at me with all your strength, but I resisted you, and I was perfectly aware of fighting victoriously against the awakening you were imposing on me. Therefore, when I awoke just now, your command, 'Come on, wake up,' resounded in my ear." My wife was very astonished to know that I had actually commanded her in thought to wake up. She did not know what book I read, and psychic problems have never interested her too much. She has never been hypnotized, neither by me nor by others. A report dated January 9, 1886, signed by A. Liabo and Stanislaus of Goethe, the famous author of The Key to Black Magic, certifies the reality of complete success in the various mental suggestions imposed on a patient asleep with induced somnambulist sleep. For example, Mr. Goethe having thought, mentally addressing himself to the subject, "Will you come back next week?" The patient replied, "It may be." Goethe then begged the subject to tell him what question he had answered. "You asked me," replied the subject, "if you will come back next week." The slight confusion which occurred in the interpretation of the proposed question would prove that it was perceived literally. 6. The analysis of facts. It appears very clearly from the foregoing that the thought of one individual may influence the thought of others and modify it in a particular sense. The whole question, practically speaking, is whether we should generalize this law and draw a conclusion applicable to the accomplishment of our purposes, whether above all it is possible to exercise over others an influence at a distance. We observe that in all cases of thought communication or mental suggestion, one or other of the following elements appears constantly. Either, on the part of the individual from whom the mental action is transmitted, a particularly vibrant, intense, energetic, concentrated state of mind, an emotion due to an accident, to the imminence of death, to the voluntary effort of the experimenter, etc., or a momentarily exceptional receptivity to the thought or suggestion, or a momentarily exceptional receptivity on the part of the person reached at a distance by the thought of others, in natural or provoked sleep, for example. We thus see very well reconciled the data of the so-called occult science, which pretends that all our states of mind, all our ideas, all our desires, all our volitions are externalized by us and tend to affect the minds concerned. The observations of the moderns who have dealt with external phenomena susceptible of making psychic action evident at a distance. If we do not feel the invisible influence of the brains that think about us, this does not mean that a slow infiltration of this influence does not affect us. If a person of weak character, of insufficient will, of little tenacity, of little resolution, is not able by his own psychic tension to master another, who is firmly resolved by compelling reasons to act according to his own inspirations, then it must not be concluded from this fact alone that the telepsychic phenomenon has not found the indispensable conditions for its complete realization. The receptivity established in the first place by sympathy, affection, and similarity of ideas accords two mentalities in such a way that, without special effort on either side, a spontaneous interpretation of the vibrations of the one takes place sometimes in the other. Inversely, as it happens to two men who speak a different dialect and cannot understand each other, two characters that present fundamental differences emit thoughts that are too radically dissimilar to make their respective wave movements communicate. We must differentiate from the simple communication, the imperative influence, the irresistible ascendancy of the will of some on psychically weaker persons. No longer does the analogy between the two tones of movement explain the phenomenon, but the superiority of the volitional intensity of the rulers over the ruled. All the training expounded in the books of magic tends to create this superiority according to definite principles, that is, by accustoming the pupil to will sharply, long, strongly. An energetic, strong-willed, or passionate character emits strong thoughts, which, acting, we wrote in the Psychology of Love. Having established guidelines and solid principles, much determination makes us invulnerable to the mental influence of others. 7. Preliminary training. If it is a question of dealing with the experiences of telepsychia, of undertaking a taking of influence over a definite individual, refer to our modern scientific method of magnetism, hypnotism, suggestion, where you will find a series of gradual experiences specially combined to obtain the phenomena mentioned. For the application to current life of the direct influence of the will upon others, you could not better prepare yourself than by giving yourself to the practices mentioned in the preceding chapters. For these practices, independently of the effect of each of them, gradually create the habit of thinking and willing clearly, equally, continuously, and energetically. This education of the will develops the intangible psychic magnetism of the individual, and, without his having to do anything special to impose himself, gives him a kind of general ascendancy. To try to influence one who has a great homogeneous psychic culture is to use one's own mental strength to one's disadvantage. In fact, the enormous expense required by this attempt would cause us a corresponding depression and leave us insufficiently armed for other efforts, and to isolate ourselves from the influences around us. Each one, either for recreational purposes or to verify the reality of the action of the will at a distance, can however give himself to the following attempts that do not cause inconvenience either to the operator or to the subject. 1. You have written to someone whose response is delayed. You think of reclaiming it. Instead of writing a second letter, suggest that they give you satisfaction. For this, take a comfortable position and imagine your correspondent writing to you. The mental image does not form in a few seconds. You must repeatedly call your attention to fix it on this idea, but after some effort, you succeed. 10 or 15 minutes of this contemplation is enough to ensure a result. 2. In the street, when you see a person coming towards you, suggest to him on which side you want him to cross you. As before, do not limit yourself to an injunction, but represent concretely the person driven by an irresistible impulse towards your right or your left. 3. From your window, as far as you can, look fixedly at a person, wishing strongly that at the moment when he will pass to the right of your house, he will raise his head and look at you. It is not necessary to say that this attempt can also succeed without the window being open and without being able to see you from outside. 4. The reverse experience can also serve as an exercise, taking care not to raise one's head or draw attention to some external manifestation. 5. In a public vehicle, pretending to be completely absorbed in the reading of any printout, direct your energy toward one of your neighbors from the side or from the face, no matter if he is far or near, and ask him to look at you or at least to turn his head toward you. Repeat this operation several times to make sure that the movements of your subject are not by chance. When you come across someone who is easily influenced, continue your experiments, varying them. If the subject holds some object in his hand, mentally represent to yourself the movement that this hand should make in order to let the object slip out of his grasp. And repeating this fiction continuously with calmness and energy, you will see that it will be carried out. 6. When someone interrupts talking to you to look for an expression, suggest an appropriate one, not by forming a mental image of it graphically, but sonically. This attempt during an interview, a lesson, a conference, gives surprising results. In this connection, we observe that it frequently happens that as soon as one of our family members addresses a sentence to us, we are struck by the similarity of his thought to our own. We express it by saying, "You tell me what I was thinking." 7. In the presence of a sick person of whose condition we have gradually formed an exact idea, we keep our thoughts on the idea of improvement, appealing to all the compassion that inspires us. We emit thoughts of calm, of well-being, of a progressive diminution of disturbances. 111 patients will always be influenced by this mental action, and sometimes to a considerable extent. We could multiply the indication of similar exercises, but the ingenuity of the reader will easily suggest others. 8. The methods according to the different authors. The rules of will development remain somewhat the same in all published courses or treatises on the subject. The methods of projecting one's mental influence on others vary with the authors. D'Urville considers that, by training in the dispositions of calm benevolence, optimism, and energy, one attracts individuals who are likely to be useful to us and rejects those who might be harmful to us. According to him, each one must concern himself almost exclusively with developing his own mental strength and giving it a good orientation, without trying to influence anyone in particular. At a certain degree of culture, we will then exercise, he says, an attractive action on all those with whom we will have to deal without any particular intention towards each one. Turnbull recommends to us first of all the mental photograph, which consists in writing what you want on a piece of paper and contemplating this piece of paper. For example, if you have a dispute with Mr. X, in order to try to give rise to thoughts in the latter's mind which are likely to modify his opinion, you will write on a large sheet of paper, "I want Mr. X to change his opinion about this matter." You will place the paper in front of you and absorb yourself in repeating the meaning of the words you have drawn. The same author states that the principle of transformation of forces of which we have already spoken applies effectively to suggestion at a distance. Thus, after having contracted your muscles, relaxing them, mentally express the intention of seeing the physical force expression thus created, transform itself into mental force expression, and project itself from you to the person on whom you wish to act. Lamotta Sage prescribes, as a means of aiding mental concentration, to fix the center of a pitcher full of water. Philioter prescribes a similar practice using a crystal globe. All these methods have their value, and among the numerous individuals who have told us that they have used one or the other, very few have not achieved a definite result. In our opinion, however, such systems are susceptible of fine-tuning. Thus, for all that is of interest to you, the daily meditation indicated in the preceding chapter, whereby you successively review the different individuals who appear in your life, provides you with an excellent opportunity of exercising a methodical influence upon them. We seem to have shown you that the clearness of the volitions, the persistence with which they are sustained, and the intensity of the desire which accompanies them, are the conditions necessary to their effectiveness. But the chief of these three qualities is certainly persistence. Thus, by repeating daily the affirmation of what we want, we gradually come to direct to a certain extent the attitude towards us of those who are the objects of our thoughts. During general meditations, if we apply ourselves to defining very precisely in detail the planes we are aiming at, we certainly send out vibrations which act on those who for whatever reason are related to our projects. More generally still, by engaging in the energetic dispositions of which we have already spoken enough in the first part of this volume, self-confidence, determination to succeed, self-control, patient activity, etc., etc., we are constantly acting on others in a profitable sense. 9. Summary and instructions for the current use of telepsyche. Action at a distance of thought. Intense states of mind, ardent, sustained, voluntary I thoughts, act invisibly at any distance upon those who are the object of them. This fact has been known to a number of scientists in every age of history and in every country. It is now studied by the highest scientific notabilities. Works of Edison, Crookes, Boirac, C.H. Richet, Flammarion, Maxwell have been published on this subject. A kind of psychic telegraphy. As with most discoveries, free science has preceded official science in the matter of telepsyche. A recently published volume of ours, Hypnotism at a Distance, Thought Transmission and Mental Suggestion, treats the matter with rigorous precision. The purpose of the present instruction is to give to those who do not wish to devote themselves to the complete study of psychic science simple and practical directions for acting at a distance. Mental, emotional, or reasoning activity develops a force of energy called psychic force, which transmits in the form of wave-like movements, analogous to Irisian waves, the exact mode of our thoughts outside ourselves. This transmission takes place circularly around the person we are thinking of and tends to develop similar thoughts in them. If you think that a fellow should write to you, this thought is accompanied by a development of psychic energy which propagates itself until it meets that fellow and arouses in his mental matter vibrations, which his consciousness will perceive in the form of an incitement to write to you. It may be that he will not obey your suggestion, but if you repeat the mental order energetically, at length, frequently, it will impose itself implacably upon him. In order to influence a person at a distance, to suggest emotions, desires, feelings, ideas, etc., it is not enough to have the intention and to think about it in a disorderly way, because then your mental vibrations are too fleeting and different to impose themselves. You must create a momentum to concentrate all your mental energy on what you want during a certain daily time. This instruction will explain everything to you, point by point. In addition, you must have a sufficiently considerable reserve of nervous strength to be able to sustain for a long time the mental representations put into activity. Useless waste. Most of us are tempted to scatter our psychic forces by thinking about too many different things. Even thinking about one thing at a time, we are led to see it from all sorts of aspects. Because of this, it seems to us that our will does not act on its own. In reality, we waste our nervous star, animizing the potential of the will. We will see the way to 1. Accumulate this force. 2. And project it usefully and effectively. Superproduction of nerve force. Nerve force is processed in the mass of the blood. Therefore, if you wish to practice influence at a distance, you must first conform to all that has been indicated in Chapter 2 for increasing the vital tone and enriching the blood. Rational nutrition, active breathing, and good circulation are the three pillars of mental strength. If these three functions are perfectly assured, the organism will produce a great deal of nerve power, and thought will be easily sustained and energetic. Suppression of unnecessary expenditures. Each manifestation of expansiveness constitutes an expenditure of nervous strength. Therefore, first of all, take care to limit your expansive movements. Concentrate on yourselves. You must not give way to the need to confide in others, to make them aware of your moods, your thoughts, your opinions, etc. This is certainly natural and pleasant, but by taking it upon yourself, you will not be able to do it. This is certainly natural and pleasant, but by taking this pleasure you will spend without the slightest profit the energy you need to influence people. Pay no attention to vain, void, or insignificant subjects, whatever pleasure they may bring. The more impulses you refuse to satisfy, the more you increase your reserve of nervous strength. Avoid putting the slightest unreflective animation into your actions and words. Do not react to what is said to you, be impassive. Do not comment on the words that are addressed to you. Do not outwardly manifest your state of mind. Say nothing to determine sympathy, flattery, astonishment, approval. Whenever you repress an impulse to speak without utility, you will retain in you a quantity of nervous force which would otherwise be spent without profit. After practicing such maxims, for 4 or 5 days only, you will feel in your innermost self the feeling of possessing a reserve of strength. Your brain will function with wonderful elasticity. Your ideas will be clear, your memory quick. Every desire should be regarded as an impulse. Any desire whose fulfillment is useless or harmful, i.e., the 907th, should be suppressed, stay unsatisfied, because its satisfaction is a loss of precious energy. How to influence a present person. When speaking to him, take care to think strongly about what you want to inculcate in him. This will be easy for you if you carry out our previous instructions for the intensive production and accumulation of nervous force. Let your words be accompanied by thought. Try to translate in the form of a mental image what you want to obtain from the subject. For example, if you say, "Will I have the satisfaction of seeing you tomorrow at a certain time?" Imagine as if you were seeing him in advance, the time of the next day or the person will come back, and imagine this person coming smiling and holding your hand, exactly as usual. If you say, "I am going to go to such a place on such a day," and you wish to obtain that the person to whom you speak also agrees to see you, imagine mentally the place where you want to go, the person who arrives there, sees you, speaks to you, etc., etc. This procedure creates the vibrations necessary to make the person see you. This procedure creates the necessary vibrations to give birth in the mind of the subject that same image that you represent to yourself. You must never forget that by giving a mental suggestion, you must imagine the subject who makes this suggestion and is satisfied with making it. In current life, train yourself to accompany your words with mental suggestion. Strongly desire that they consent to what you say. If you want to suggest a person present without speaking to him, mentally imagine this person thinking of what you want, feeling the desires that refer to what you think, fulfilling them, etc. Procedure for acting at a distance. Returning to our decision not to place within the reach of all the exact procedures for influencing at a distance, we shall expound them to you without leaving anything in the dark. It is better that these procedures should be divulged, even if some abuse be produced, because this science will give to the human mind possibilities of progress, which it greatly needs, since men still kill each other for material reasons. Our method substitutes subtle means of action for material means. It obliges the person who wishes to use it for control, to will vigorously, to reason. In order for your thoughts to be transmitted and to stimulate with sufficient power the mind of the person you are thinking of, 4 conditions are necessary. 1. Precision. You must consider what you want with precision and clarity in the form of a clear and precise image. 2. Fixity of concentration. All your attention must be concentrated on the above image, which you will gradually keep fixed in your spirit. 3. Continuity. It is not enough to keep the image fixed for a few moments. It must be done at length for 15, 30, 45 minutes, or more if necessary, and start again every day until the result is achieved. 4. Voluntary intensity. By giving yourself over to concentration, you must maintain the ardent desire. the imperious will to obtain from the subject what you want. Keeping all this in mind, this is exactly the way to proceed. First time, sit comfortably in a quiet place, close your eyes, relax your muscles, and give yourself 5 minutes of complete immobility. Time 2. Imagine that the person you want to influence is close to you, or even that you see him where he really is. Mentally represent to yourself his face, his features, his outline. Don't worry for 10 or 15 minutes about making an exact, living, precise portrait. Help your memory, if you wish, by looking at a photograph. Third time, now imagine that your subject finds himself suddenly struck by your memory, that your image comes to his mind, that he sees you in his mind, that he thinks of you, that he cannot detach himself from the vision of your image, that he takes pleasure in considering it, etc. Continue this for 10 or 15 minutes. Do not become agitated. Think calmly about what you are doing. Tell yourself continually, I force him to think of me. He cannot do otherwise. This image imposes itself on his spirit, etc. Of course, all this must be seen by you in the form of an image, as if you were seeing it at the cinema. Fourth time, imagine then that the subject feels the sensations, the impulses, the states of mind that you would like him to have towards you. Imagine him thinking with your image in front of his eyes, saying to himself, I feel attracted by this person. I wish to see him. I feel well with him. I wish to be liked by him, or something similar. Continue this for 20 or 30 minutes or more. Start again every day. Details of the suggestions. The more the real state of the subject's feelings towards you is different from what you suggest, the more it will be necessary to repeat the session to obtain the result. As we explained in the book entitled Psychology of Love, your psychic action at a distance encounters in the mind of the subject a greater or lesser resistance, which is attenuated little by little under the effect of the psychic undulations projected by you, which end up imposing themselves and modifying the vibratory tone of the mind of the subject. Can the subject resist? The subject's resistance is unconscious when it exists. It comes mainly from the tendencies of his character, which are antagonistic to what you want. But your psychic action gradually modifies the determinations of the subject, and unless he is acquainted with psychic science, he has not even the idea of resisting, for he does not know that he can be influenced invisibly. Everyone can succeed. The ability to act at a distance with thought moved by the will is inherent in the human being. There is not the slightest doubt about this. You can perfectly succeed. In short, there is nothing extraordinary about this phenomenon. It takes place quite naturally. It is still little known, but for those who wish to make an effort, it is a singularly valuable means of action. Chapter 8. The direct action of the will on destiny. 1. Every representation, mental, impels us towards the object or impels it towards us. We give our readers the following notions only to make them meditate. We leave to their experience the care of accepting or rejecting them. Our personal observations made us consider them even before we had their confirmation in the so-called occultism. According to this system, every being is in the process of evolution, and the purpose of existence is the acquisition of knowledge. Man is said to consist of a number of interpenetrating bodies, each of which is of a different substance, and each of which has its own faculties. Therefore, occultists differentiate our visible body, whose atom is that of physical matter, and which is the seat of sensory life, from the body called astral, whose substance is not perceptible except under certain conditions and is the seat of emotional life, and from the body called mental, even more subtle than the previous one, and the seat of intellectual life. As we are immersed in the air, gaseous physical matter, we find ourselves in a vast ocean of other matters of different essences, from those of which our astral and mental bodies are composed. Our emotional and intellectual activities would have an invisible but generating repercussion of tangible results on their respective planes, that is, on the whole of the astral and mental substances. We do not conceal from ourselves how obscure this brief exposition must seem to those who are entirely profane. We therefore refer them to the special works, if they wish to deepen their knowledge on the subject. What is important now is to bring out the fact that these theories seem to occur by those results of which we spoke before. Thus, when you experience any affective state, this, at least it seems, does not remain in the virtual state, but determines in the astral plane particular forms that equally put into operation different factors, acting in their turn on you. A definite emotion, anger for example, operates in the astral plane, a violent perturbation of which you suffer the repercussions, and attracts destructive forces or influences. The desire for an object, especially when joined to its mental representation, acts invisibly in such a way that, if it persists for a certain time, we either attract to us a person who is likely to put really into our possession that which we have thought of, or we exercise on the causalities of the environment an action which modifies them, so that we soon obtain the object in question. For whom among us does not observe an apparent relation between certain psychic movements and certain events which occur sometimes very quickly, after the will has been set in motion, and sometimes at an interval? You have lost a book, an instrument, a document. You actively search for it during a certain time, without finding it. Of necessity, you give up finding it immediately. But after a few minutes of an indecisive state of mind, in which you evaluate the immediate use of your time, the idea comes to you, which relates more or less directly to these evaluations, to go, for example, to such and such a place in your apartment, to such and such a piece of furniture, where you yourself, putting your hand on the lost object, are surprised to find it. Another example. You are absorbed for some time in a work for which you would need an indication, a book, a contribution of any kind that you do not know how to get. And here comes from the most unexpected source a tangible answer to your question. According to a law upheld by the occultists who renew the science of the ancient initiates, thought tends to realize itself by putting into operation factors and influences necessary for this. It seems a priori that a formal refutation is given to this assertion by the manifest opposition of what happens to us and what would have been convenient to us. But do not the multiplicity of our volitions and their antagonism sufficiently explain our disdain? Under the impulse of the will, the invisible factors of fulfillment react. But in that infinity of desires and aspirations, of more or less contradictory tendencies, we must not crumble their docile contest. To desire at the same time, as we have written elsewhere, physiological equilibrium, constant well-being, intense enjoyment. To desire at the same time the light of knowledge, the satisfaction of passion. To seek in parallel a colossal fortune and aesthetic culture. To pretend to accomplish a grandiose work, and to live by mad love. This means to emit two currents of force that tend to neutralize each other. Let us look at people to whom everything seems to be going well. Let us observe them. Let us see that they are only those whose thoughts are always fixed on the same goal. Let us look at people to whom everything seems to be going well. Let us observe them. Let us observe that they are only those whose thoughts are always fixed upon the same goal. 2. The causal chaining. Thoughts of the same nature attract each other. Thoughts of the opposite nature repel each other. In other words, the habitual mode of your states of mind puts and keeps you in relation to those who keep themselves in dispositions similar to yours. This law appears evident in the various writings of the occultist school. Commonly it is thus formulated: the like associates. But the meaning of this saying is limited in the spirit of most of us to the idea of an entirely psychological selection. But certain chance encounters suggest an extension of this interpretation. Telepsyche, which has now entered into the positive domain, would be sufficient to explain the interference at a distance of two corresponding or complementary mentalities, and the formation of a chain, of a current of attraction which goes on unceasingly from one to the other, until one day they meet physically. If it be true that our secret intentions are susceptible of induction upon those whose enlightenment, whose assistance, whose support, whose service would be useful to us, for this same reason it seems, and to a great extent, possible to us to condition certain circumstances of our destiny. What happens to us today would be the consequence of our previous thoughts. So too, our present thoughts would influence the causalities which generate future events. The prediction of the future acquired by modern science, such as telepsychics, shows how every event pre-exists its material manifestation. Every fact would be the result of a series of causalities, which some can foresee and appreciate in advance. 3. Some suggestive examples on prediction. In his work entitled Psychical Phenomena, Dr. Maxwell recalls how one of his subjects had one day, while staring at a crystal, a vision of a ship in flames, and described the vicissitudes of the fire, and indicated a name which he saw on the sides of the ship, Deutschland. A week later, the ship Deutschland was wrecked in the Atlantic. The subject, in the course of his prediction, read L instead of D, but we agreed to judge this small confusion as insignificant, especially since the initial of the ship might have been a bit faded and reminded of the shape of an L. Here, then, is a shipwreck that was already established at least 8 days before it actually happened. Virtually all the necessary elements could be reflected in the form of a precise and perceptible image for a being endowed with exceptional faculties. Flammarion in Death and Its Mystery mentions another fact of prediction, more suggestive still than the preceding from the point of view which interests us. Professor Bohm, who taught mathematics in Marburg, spent an evening with a friend of his and was suddenly overcome by the conviction that he must return home. But as he was quietly sipping his tea, he resisted this inspiration, which nevertheless came back to him with such force that he was forced to give in. When he arrived at his house, he found everything as he had left it, but he felt compelled to change his bed. Absurd as this mental order might seem, he felt that he must carry it out. He called the servant and dragged the bed with her help to the other side of the room. When he had done this, he felt calm and was able to return to his friends to finish the evening. They left at 10 o'clock. He returned home, got into bed, and fell asleep. Awakened at night by a great crash, he saw a large beam that had fallen, dragging with it part of the ceiling right where his bed used to be. Does not the element put into operation by the will of Mr. Bohm appear from what precedes to have arisen to communicate to him the inspirations, the impulses indispensable to his safety? It was fatally foreordained that he should suffer some great fracture, probably even death, on the night on which the beam in question fell. The mysterious mechanism by which he was warned and saved can only be explained by the data already given, that is to say, by the concurrence of a reactive plan under the activity of human intelligence. It may be asked why, being understood to fear every accident, we are not in the moment of danger also effectively rescued. This objection, though it leaves intact the problem posed by the case of the preceding species, resembles that which might be made in the circumstance in which of two men risking the same danger, one owing to his faculties and his cold blood, for instance, gets off scot-free, while the other, less happily endowed, succumbs. 4. Practical directions. We are under no illusion that all readers will follow us on the above ground. We have, however, wished that this side of the question of the power of the will should not pass over in silence. Besides, whether or not we admit the action of thought upon the deeper causes, there remains to be considered the indirect effect of our rectitude of mind upon our destiny. The same guiding principles impose themselves. By adopting a fixed mode of orientation, to which we subordinate all our aspirations to the main, we give satisfaction equally to the laws of reason and to the principles of psychism. For the rationalist will consider that he thus judiciously employs his mental energy, and the occultist will aim at the necessity of insisting upon the formation of the mental images themselves in order to secure their realization. The same striving to maintain within oneself, in spite of the various perturbing causes that may arise, a perfect equality of mood will be for the one a wise measure of domination, for the other the observance of the law of attraction of the conditions of calm by means of the culture of this state of mind. At the same time, physiology tells us that pessimism, hatred, anger intoxicate the organism, and magic workers maintain that such feelings attract to us destructive forces and violent events. Blind obedience to the emotional passions judged according to these two different points of view leads to an identical conclusion. It is necessary to master one's impulsiveness. Some see the necessity of this because of the psychic disorder inherent in overly intense emotional states. Others think that, by tolerating in oneself a serious disorderliness, one prepares a correlative in the causal plane of events for a more or less distant future. Occult theories indicate, as a direct practical application of the will to destiny, extremely complicated procedures. We regard them as mechanical means of supporting mental concentration. They are certainly useless for those who have trained themselves to will seriously. One can trace the magical ceremonial to a simple volitional effort. In your moments of meditation especially, when you feel your mind disposed and have carefully specified the data of the problems you have set out to accomplish, the attributes of the man you wish to become, the material and moral conditions of the situation for which you are striving, think that an invisible agent lies around you, the docile vehicle of the continuous, precise, energetic wills. Reminding yourself of all the causes that sustain you in your daily struggle, contemplate until you feel within you an enthusiastic movement of activity. Then, channeling this wave of energy, calmly project it, defining what you wish to achieve as clearly as possible. Beware of agitation and overexcitement, and remain entirely your own master. Wish with the calm power of the man who knows exactly what he seeks, and who continually tells himself that he will be able to determine it. Imaginatively representing the events you desire in all their details, possibly in their logical sequence, repeat inwardly with energy, "I want things to be this way. My life must be this way. I create the determining conditions of what I desire," etc. This practice has in itself the excellent effect of consolidating resolutions, of eliminating paralyzing doubt, and of keeping the spirit oriented toward the principal points that demand attention. Chapter 9. How to achieve the development of your will through the works of the author of this book. The reading of certain books maintains and stimulates the energy. Thus, for example, the reading of the author's books. His work forms a collection of which each volume brings new means, new forces that give the reader a new impulse of energy. In order to take full advantage of the teaching that follows that of the present manual, it is advantageous to learn it in a certain order. For this reason, the present chapter added to the first edition seems to us necessary. 1. Sleep and energy. From the very first chapter, the author has demonstrated the importance of the nervous force. Nerve power, which may be regarded as the very source of volitional energy, is mainly developed during sleep each night. If you sleep badly or insufficiently, you will read profitably. If you overcome insomnia in spite of worries, noise, or pain, you will learn to fall asleep easily without drugs, a complete restorative sleep. Such a kind of sleep determines upon awakening the characteristic need for will and action. 2. Depressive mental states. The tormented spirit, the strained nerves wear modern man down in his place. The complex difficulties of modern life, its endless obsessive solicitations multiplying cravings, its disoriented haste, suffice by universalizing the strain, the disorder and the excesses, to unbalance even robust psycho-nervous organisms, and to ruin vitality free from hereditary defects. Thus, even outside of the disturbances due to constitutional anomalies, numerous varieties of neurocerebral disorders are observed. The Book of the Nervous teaches those concerned how to prepare themselves and how to react, how to impose order and calmness on their organism before anything else, how to eliminate disorganizing elements from their psychism, how to integrate it with notions that generate vigor, lucidity, and serenity. The exhausted, the weak, will learn how any excessive tension of the nerves and the brain can be compensated for. How, by weighing the threat, it is possible to stop the emotional turmoil, overcome the intellectual panic, and reorder one's realizing energies. As for the shocks that shake, the adversities that disorganize, the bruises that annihilate, we teach them how to conceive the training to oppose the inseparable hostilities of life, a kind of individual strategy made of vigilant realism to prevent, and of resolute imperturbability to undergo the inevitable, and thus regain in the shortest time the integral balance and internal peace. 3. Absolute mastery of oneself. In the present work, we have dealt with the power of the will from 3 points of view, but it is necessary first of all to devote oneself to the development of absolute self-mastery, because without self-mastery, one cannot profitably exercise the influence of the will either over others or over the factors of destiny. A special treatise, Rational Method for Acquiring Self-Mastery, is available to those who want to learn to become energetic, to overcome their weaknesses, to govern their instincts, to dominate their emotions, to direct their thinking, and to act constantly with decision. In Chapter 5, we dealt with autosuggestion. This procedure is susceptible of numerous applications, all described in detail in the practical method of self-suggestion by the same author. By self-suggestion, one can modify one's personality, one's tendencies, one's inclinations, do away with habits, acquire the imperturbability, the strength of character, the firmness which characterizes absolute mastery over oneself, and finally undertake the culture of every faculty. In all organic, nervous, or moral diseases, we experience rapid improvement under the effect of autosuggestion and radical cure in most of them. One cannot count the desperate, the infirm, the incurable who have been cured by the use of the power of thought. This essentially practical book constitutes a clear and precise manual, from which are excluded those exaggerations and illogicalities which have long turned serious people away from the study of mental problems. An important part of the book deals with the art of suggesting others, and thus of operating re-educations and healings, made possible by the manipulation of the subconscious mind. 4. Confidence and ease of speech. In striving for self-mastery, even the most timid acquire a certain imperturbability. But the man who wishes to eliminate from himself every vestige of timidity, in society, in business, in private life, must sometimes struggle for a long time to free himself definitively and completely from his natural predispositions. Here is a sure guide to cultivating confidence in all its forms, Shyness 1, a clear and practical book that really enables the most deeply shy, fearful, and impressionable natures to become strong and bold, hard to be moved, calm and clear-headed in all circumstances. There are books describing the manifestations of shyness. The present volume positively shows the way to get rid of it quickly and forever. After putting this into practice, if we wish to be able to speak in public, to succeed in sales or representation, or more simply to fortify ourselves from the point of view of persuasive utility, we will read The Education of Speech, a manual for learning clear, easy, perfect speech. Exclusively practical from the first to the last line, it shows the way to methodically acquire the ideas, the indispensable knowledge to interest those with whom we speak, to participate brilliantly in any conversation. The abundance of words, of expressions, of phrases, abundance that will enable you to express your thoughts always with exactness, clarity, strength. The vocal sonority and the correct, distinct, expressive pronunciation that gives your words grace and distinction. Security, calmness, and persuasive ability, the use of which, especially in business, constitutes one of the most precious advantages that exist. 5. Ideas, memory, and editorial facility. You can learn anything easily and imprint it early in your mind and indelibly. Recall it whenever you wish, without forgetfulness and confusion. You can attain the level of education necessary for a brilliant career. You can acquire the competence and professional skill of the man who succeeds. For this, permeate yourself with the principles set forth in our book, How to Achieve a Perfect Memory. This method shows the way to achieve the chaining of the necessary recollections, or to recall facts instantaneously to memory, which in every circumstance causes to arise in an orderly manner from the depths of the memory, the tonality of notions susceptible to inspire happily the word, to consolidate and determine the will, to give finally to the judgment an immediate security. Once your memory is well organized and exercised, you will learn to express yourself easily and correctly in writing with the help of the book entitled The Education of Style. In its first part, this book is a guide for the reader who only wants to know how to conveniently write any utilitarian writing, letter, report, exposé, etc. The second part deals with literary composition, not only as regards the writing itself, but also and above all, the sources of inspiration and the coordination of this for original creations. The authors have endeavored to be useful to the greatest number, showing the way to the self-taught who wish to accomplish with honor all editorial work, and guiding those who possess, without yet knowing how to take advantage of it, the ability to write. 6. Hypnotism and its function in the training of mental vigor. The practice of hypnotism exercises the will as movement exercises the muscles. Now the modern scientific method of magnetism, hypnotism, and suggestion by the same author gives very clear and precise instructions for training in hypnotism. It is a complete practical course. Strictly scientific, it places the procedures and the various possibilities of psychism entirely within the reach of all. The reader will find illustrated, with beautiful engravings, especially the most effective ways to produce each phase of hypnosis, from the lightest effects to the waking state, up to the artificial somnambulism. All the works published to date in the two hemispheres on the psychic sciences are practically summarized in this volume, which deals thoroughly with sensory hypnotism, suggestion, physiological magnetism, telepsychic action, lucidity, clairvoyance, exteriorization of sensibility, doubling, mediumistic phenomena, psychomagnetic medicine, psychic self-culture, and personal magnetism. 7. Telepsychic influence. This influence, as we have seen in Chapter 7, communicates and gradually causes strong and sustained thoughts to predominate in the minds of those who are its objects. Every thought, emitted with vigor and insistence, seems to possess the property of radiating itself, of communicating itself, of imposing itself. This explains many phenomena which science has not explained for years. It also explains the undeniable dominating power of certain individuals. In the work entitled Hypnotism at a Distance, the reader will find the procedures of telepsychic action clearly explained. After stating the laws of telepsyche, the author deals particularly with their experimental applications, concerted communications, transmission of thought in the waking or hypnotic state, suggestion, etc. He then goes on to discuss the practical adaptations of telepsychic influence in daily life, and shows how one can influence a person, either from a distance or close up, without seeing or speaking to him. 8. The art of pleasing and seductive attraction. In order to influence usefully a person whom you would like to participate in your feelings, the first condition is to be master of your means in his presence. The second consists in impressing him favorably, which will be all the more easy for you the more you will have paid attention to the development of your personal attractiveness, your grace, your personal magnetism. 2 volumes have been written on this subject. One deals with the psychology of love from 3 points of view: sensory, sentimental, and cerebral. By reading this work, you will understand the laws of love enchainment. This book clearly explains how the irresistible domination of the heart, spirit, and senses is formed, sometimes instantaneously by love, how each one can develop within himself the elements of this filter that captivates, of this seductive power that creates deep and exclusive love. The author subtly analyzes the causes of the disdain, indifference, and gradual abandonment from which so many abandoned hearts suffer. He deals especially with unhappy love, whether occasional or continuous. It also provides protection against defeat. It shows the way to bring back to oneself the lover who strays, the way to make noble impulses prevail against fictitious seduction and perfidious rivalries, enemies of the domestic hearth. It opens up a luminous horizon of hope for the most disinherited, indicating how anyone can discern who knows how to love according to the dreamed ideal. The other book is a method of developing personal attractiveness. Despite the meanest appearances, some beings are attractive, likable, seductive. They are said to have charm. This influence is developed according to fixed laws and by means of various procedures mentioned in the method in question, which is absolutely unique. 9. Discernment of character. I know how to take him. I know him so well. It is said of someone whose character we have been able to observe by long practice. Indeed, it is considerably easier to influence a person whose inclinations we know than a stranger. Now, each physiognomy bears the imprint of the personality. Before dealing with anyone, the examination of the features of his profile, the contours, the proportions of his face, already give you the elements of his character. The study of faces, as attractive as it is useful, gives us the satisfaction of being able to discern who those around us, or those with whom we come in contact, really are. This study provides us with a solid basis for personal influence, and in particular, for the art of persuading, convincing, conquering, because it shows us how to distinguish at first glance temperaments, tendencies, faculties, attitudes, tastes, inclinations of all kinds. The psychological investigation of faces, above all, provides us with the necessary clues to guide our speech and attitude when it comes to conciliating the sympathy and affection of someone, to preserve, to choose one's friends, to direct a child in the way that suits him, to conclude a business deal, to associate, to unite, and always to avoid misplacing trust. You will therefore read with the greatest interest the telltale signs of character and destiny. The author has made of this book a masterpiece of clarity and precision. From the first pages you will understand that form, predispositions, and predestinations are inseparable, and you will find a lively pleasure in reading into the depths of souls, in removing masks, in foiling dissimulations, in discovering the innermost thoughts, in discerning true merit, real and superior qualities. 10. The laws of success. The whole of the preceding works places within the reach of the reader every knowledge susceptible of contributing to the development of his aptitudes, to the culture of his personal influence, initiative, and faculties, accomplishment. The reader has nothing to do but to use judiciously the means of discernment and action which have thus been inculcated in him. For this reason, the book The Laws of Success will find its place in the home library, so that those who need it always have at hand a tactical and strategic advisor to guide their efforts in the struggle for life, and show them how to overcome obstacles, solve difficulties, and implement their plans continuously. 11. The secret science and its teachings on the power of the will. Occult or secret science deals with the relations of interdependence which unite man with nature in their threefold essence: spiritual, psychic, and fateful. Occult science shows us that, instead of being isolated and reduced to the mere means of his material entity, man communicates with the whole of the cosmos. While he undergoes or sets in motion matter by means of his physical organs, he is linked by his dynamic entity, or sidereal body, to all cosmic forces, and by means of his intelligent principle, to the absolute emanator or rector of the world. To study this science is to deal with the highest problems, and to investigate the greatest mysteries. It is also to initiate oneself into the knowledge of the psychic powers latent in each of us, and which, developed by ascent, enable one to impose upon becoming, upon fatality, the sovereign dominion of the deliberate volitional word. Those who feel disposed to it will read Occult Science and Practical Magic book that will show them the widest horizon of the powers of the human spirit and will make them understand infinite mysterious phenomena. High magic and its subversive counterpart, black magic, their rites, their practices, their prodigious effects, are very clearly explained in the light of occultism, because they derive from its very principles. Within the invisible of phenomenism which still escapes modern scientists, but which antiquity has well known, serves as a basis for the various magical operations, and modern man, like his initiate ancestors, if he knows how to will, can put into action, without studded sword or ritual wand, the invisible dynamic servant of thought. 12. The healing power of the initiates. Every well-balanced person, animated by an intense desire to effect cures, will find in the initiation into the art of healing by human magnetism the indications necessary to relieve the sick, and to effect integral cures by transfusing his own vital energy into the sick or deficient organism of the one who suffers. Magnetization is never inconvenient either for the magnetizer or for the magnetized. It has only good effects. In a family, the husband may, in many cases, be the doctor of the wife. The latter may have a great influence on the health of her husband and her children. Generally, it is enough to feel a sincere compassion for the sick person in front of us in order to exteriorize the biological irradiation called magnetism, the balancing and healing properties of which have been known since ancient times. Moreover, it is necessary to know how to project this irradiation, by means of which procedures to transmit this radiation in order to obtain the most precise and powerful effects. This book is illustrated with photogravures showing in particular steps, impositions, applications, blowing, and other modes of magnetization, and teaches the application of the said science for a great number of acute and chronic diseases. It is so clear that everyone can understand it without difficulty as soon as he reads it, and can then move on to experiments. 13. The arcana of the future. By double sight or second sight, we mean that supernormal property of the human psyche, of which the most frequent manifestation is presentiment, and of which the most integral powers are the exact and detailed knowledge of future events, and the vision at a distance of present scenes, that is to say, clairvoyance in time and space. The presentiments, the clairvoyance, the somnambulic lucidity, and the other modes of double vision have been the object of experimental researches for half a century, which leave no doubt as to their reality. Numerous investigators, such as Boirac, Maxwell, Vaside, Richet, Discernment, and Osti, whose conclusions are based on numerous and meticulous verifications, have given for certain that these phenomena proceed from a sort of sixth sense, and have shown how to awaken, exercise, and develop this sense. The theoretical and practical treatise on double sight has precisely the aim of guiding the attempts of those who are interested in this question in such a powerful way as to determine them to deal with its practical study. In the first theoretical and documentary part, you will find the exposition of the notions, whose preliminary knowledge is necessary for the experimenter. The second part of the work consists of a series of practical directions for the development of supernormal perception. It includes a detailed method for the determination of the phenomena of psychometry, clairvoyance, lucidity, etc., the composition and manner of using magic mirrors, used in the East and in the West, are described with the utmost precision. Like the author's previous treatises on hypnotism, suggestion, human magnetism, and psychic influence at a distance, this book will be appreciated by all scholars because it has been composed, from the first to the last line, with the purpose of assuring them positive results. Closing credits. This recording of the power of the will, over self, over others, over fate, practical method of personal influence by Paul C. JAGOT, was presented by Stargate Book. Sound recording copyright 2023 and produced by Deep Send Limited 2023.